Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. 50-year-old Beverly Carter lived in Scott, near Little Rock, Arkansas. She lived with her husband of 35 years, Carl, and together they had 3 boys, Carl Jr., Chad, and Christopher, and 5 grandchildren. Beverly and Carl first met when she was 16, when she started working at a dairy bar. A group of construction workers would eat there daily. One of them was Carl, and he was quick to strike up a conversation with her. He joked, "I knew I was going to get a wife when I got that hamburger." His instinct was right. They quickly married and had their first baby. Carl Jr., as blissful as the first years of marriage were, they were soon faced with their fair share of hard times and financial woes, moving a lot and having to live with family members to get by. Carl's job in construction would take him here, there, and everywhere. Beverly stayed at home with their 3 sons until their youngest started school. She decided it was a good time to get back into work, and in the early 2000s, she became interested in the real estate business. Just as things seemed to be on the up, tragically, in 2003, 19-year-old Christopher was killed in a car accident, leaving behind his baby girl Bailey. At the time, and Beverly were living in a home they had designed and built themselves, but Chris had lived there as well, and there was now too much sadness attached to it. So they set about moving again. They eventually took an 11-year-old Bailey full-time, and more grandchildren followed Bailey. This gave Beverly and Carl so many reasons to smile and enjoy things again. Beverly adored being a grandmother and would half-jokingly beg her sons to have more babies. To say they were all close as a family would be an understatement. As Beverly and Carl hit their 20th anniversary, they renewed their wedding vows. When they got married all those years ago, it was at the city hall, and it was a quiet, quick, and low-key wedding. Beverly wanted to have this day to wear her dream dress and do everything they couldn't afford to do last time. She finally got her real estate license and joined Cry Like Realtor. Beverly had a natural flair, was confident, funny, and charming. Her friends said she had a personality that you couldn't forget and a big goofy laugh that just made you smile. This warm energy translated into big sales, and she soon became the top in the company and one of the top 5 realtors in the state. She was never one to slow down and was always looking for the next thing to get stuck into. As her 50th birthday was approaching, she started training for marathons and races, and she and Carl started traveling together. On the evening of the 25th of September, 2014, Beverly had a house viewing. The potential buyers were a young married couple seeking a change of scene. They were coming from a built-up city, and this house was nice and rural, very quiet, just what they were looking for. They wanted a quick buy and said they could pay in cash. This was all promising. Beverly had been keen to sell this place for a while, and things had been tight financially with less sales than she was used to, so she was crossing everything and hoping the couple liked it. By now she'd been in real estate for over a decade, and although she knew the potential risks of going to meet people alone, it had never caused her any issues before. She always wrote down the names and addresses and shared them with her husband too, just in case anything happened. She told the potential buyers she would be at the house just before 6 p.m. She could swing by on her way back from work and pick up dinner for her, and Carl on the way home. She texted Carl saying having a showing today, Mexican later my treat. She gave him the address to 14202 Old River Drive in Scott along with the couple's names. Beverly said she loved him and would see him soon, and with this she set off in her car. Little did she know, or could have ever known, the names and details she had been given were completely fake. An hour would pass, then another, and soon it was almost 9 p.m. Carl had been getting nervous, but was trying to talk himself out of it. He phoned their son Carl Jr., who too worked in real estate, and told his dad that realistically it wasn't that late. She had probably just got caught up. Sometimes these chats could go on for longer than expected, but Carl Sr. wasn't so sure. He went straight to the address of the property, and here he found his wife's car parked outside. A small sigh of relief, she must be inside. But as he got out of his car, he saw that the front door was wide open and none of the lights were on. He looked through the car window and spotted her bag and notebook on the passenger seat. Inside the property, there was no noise and no trace of Beverly. As he reached the final empty room, his stomach lurched, and he grabbed his phone to call 911. The property was soon filled with Beverly's family, friends, and colleagues. It was now after midnight, 6 hours since anyone had last heard from her. Her closest friends in the agency all had a secret code for safety. They would ask work about a folder. So her best friend Brenda sent a text asking if she had left the folder on her desk. She got no response, as everyone huddled around on the cold, dark driveway, with only the lights of the police cars to see. Her husband Carl's phone also lit up. It was a message from Beverly's phone, a moment of complete relief until they read the text. They said, "Sorry, phone been dead, having drinks now." Beverly did not drink. Everyone that she would normally be with was at the house, and she hadn't replied to anyone else's messages. Clearly it was not Beverly. A neighbor from across the house told the detectives that they had seen a black car pull up before Beverly's had got there. She described the man that got out as a skinny white male with short hair. The car had been parked oddly. The trunk was backed up close to the front door. The neighbor didn't see or hear anything else after that, but they did have a vague time and a description to work from. At the time, Little Rock did have a high violent crime rate, nearly quadruple the national average in fact, and the police had a lot of lines of inquiry to look into. Beverly's phone was being tracked and had been on the move for a few hours, but it now appeared that it had been turned off or the battery had died. As the Pulaski County Sheriff's Crime Scene Unit combs through this home in Scott, real estate agent Stacy Medlock is searching the surrounding area. "We just want her safe. We want her safe, back with her family." Medlock and dozens of other agents posting flyers, asking for information, and looking for leads to find their missing colleague. If they have seen anything, any kind of vehicles, anything, let the police know. Pulaski County Sheriff's officers called to this home around September 30th, Thursday night, by Beverly Carter's husband after he hadn't heard from her for several hours. To reality check actually, to make sure people know where we are and who we are showing property to. When he had last spoken with her 4 hours earlier, she was planning on showing the home to a client. She did actually call and make the appointment, and I believe that they were checking out all the records. According to officers' reports, Beverly's husband found the scene much like this. Her car in the driveway with her purse locked inside, but the door to the home wide open. When he searched the house, he found no sign of his wife. Sheriff's investigators processed the home for evidence throughout much of the day. This is just too close. It's just unbelievably unreal. Just too close to home. Even as those who know Beverly are trying to process the fact she's still missing. Over 200 volunteers joined in the search, and soon the case had spread far past her small community. #FindBeverly was trending, and huge amounts of grounds were being covered. Fellow realtors joined in too, and a lot of firms closed in solidarity. Many places immediately started changing their practices. Agents began signing up for self-defense lessons, and made sure people showed houses in pairs at the very least. Carl was still in shock, and in between searching for her, he was appealing using every media outlet that was running her story. I heard that she had a cash buyer, a referral to her, and she was kind of excited about that. By 9 o'clock, I knew something was wrong. By 8 o'clock, I knew something was wrong, but I'd give it till 8.30. I just would like to have my wife back. I beg anybody, just take her over and drop her off on the sidewalk and keep driving. I ask of that right there. There's some crazy people out here in the world. I mean, sorry, there is. And I just pray that they'll be better than. Beverly's been doing it for about 12 years. She knew what she was doing. She was dang good at it. But just don't take with one crook. The first place they obviously needed to hone in on was the house she was looking after the listing for. Who had she met that day? Who is this mystery cash offer couple? The names written in her notebook were Stephen and Crystal Adams, but the phone numbers attached had recently been created using another phone. None of these details were real. The person that had set them up had to have a real number to be able to do this, and working backwards it gave them a name, Crystal Lowry. Running her details through the system turned up nothing. She had no criminal record, but her husband, Aaron Lewis, did. The 33-year-old was a serial offender with a string of prior convictions, starting at just 14 years old. He spent 6 years in prison for robbing a bank, got out and started transporting stolen cars. He had committed fraud, scammed people, robbed houses and businesses. Aaron was now estranged from his wife Crystal, but they still lived together, so investigators started closely monitoring their home, but Aaron was clearly on the move. They issued a bolo, or be on the lookout, so people could see his face. They now believed he had kidnapped her, and was potentially holding her somewhere. We expect we will get information today. My expectation is to find Beverly and find her okay, but time is of the essence. The plan today is we're going to set up a grid around the area where Beverly went missing and search everything we possibly can and hopefully not find anything except her. I've had texts and calls from the general public. I've got calls from all over the state from realtors and owners and brokers that are pledging anything and everything that they possibly can to help out. Knock on doors to let people know that you're walking through their backyards. It means everything to me. The prayers, the emails, the Facebook posts, the sharing, everything is. It just shows that what we give is appreciated, and it comes back when we need it. Beverly was one of my two first agents, and everything's going to work out. On September 28th, Aaron crashed his car. Aaron was taken to hospital, but escaped without anyone discharging him. A warrant was finally issued for his arrest, and he was facing a charge of kidnapping, and one person that saw him recognized his face from the news. He called 911. 911. Hey, I'm sitting over here. They're looking for a guy here that was involved in the realtor being kidnapped. And this guy looks like him, and he is nervous, and he's out here at a bus stop. What bus stop? Green Mountain Drive in Rainwood. I mean, it might not be him. He's going into the subway now. All right, we'll get someone out there. Okay, now I had a guy walk out there and talk to him. I just went out there to see, and he says they think it's him. When they pulled him in for questioning, it was clear he was going to do everything he could to remain in control of the interview. This was on his terms. He was cold, unbothered, and unwilling to talk. He handed over his phone, and then played a recording. It was Beverly. Beverly, I just want to let you know I'm okay. I haven't been hurt. Just do what he says. Please don't call the police. If you call the police, it could be bad. Just want you to know I love you very much. It was terrifying to listen to, but even on the recording, you can hear how calm and strong she's being, despite the nightmare that must have been unraveling in her head. Beverly thought she was meeting a couple, but when she got there, it was just him. Aaron admitted he had gone inside the house with Beverly and asked her to take some pictures to send to his wife. The pictures were a little blurry and shaky, and detectives felt she must have sensed that something was off. She was in a rush to take them and just get out of there. But before she could get to the front door, Aaron said he pulled out a taser and said, "You're about to have a very bad day. You're being kidnapped." The question was she still being held somewhere, or was it all a trap? And she was no longer alive. The glimmer of hope that they had that they may be able to bring her home safely was further fueled when Aaron said he wasn't going to reveal where she was, but insinuated she could still be alive. How long do we have? They were able to keep him in custody, and if the search for Beverly was not already intense enough, it had now reached a critical point. Our suspect is in custody. He was arrested this morning. He is in the investigations interrogation room at this point, in the process of being interviewed in regard to his connection to this disappearance of Beverly Carter. So, we will have him here for as long as we need. Where is she? Beverly Carter, where is she? Where is she? What is your relation to her? Did you do anything? I'm asking you a question. Did you do anything? Why did they have you arrested? Do you know Beverly Carter? You. Where is she? Where is she? After 12 more hours of questioning, the team got a major break from his phone data. It led them to a concrete business about 20 miles away from the house she was showing. But it was here that hope was snatched away. On September 30th, just 5 days into the search, Beverly Carter's body was found in a shallow grave at the cement plant. It was a previous place of work for Aaron. We have a breaking news alert right now from Arkansas. The body of missing realtor Beverly Carter has been found in a shallow grave north of Little Rock. Her hands were bound, and her whole face had been completely wrapped in duct tape. The autopsy confirmed she had died from suffocation as a result of the tape. The Carter family issued a statement. "We are devastated at the loss of our precious Beverly. There is now a hole in our hearts that will never be filled. Mr. Lewis robbed us of an amazing wife, loving mother, and grandmother. Her grandkids will never get to know the magnitude of her greatness." In Aaron's car, police found the duct tape and some of what turned out to be Beverly's hair. And in his and Crystal's house, they found her phone. They also arrested Aaron's estranged wife, 41-year-old Crystal Lowry, believing that she had to be involved. Crystal was more forthcoming and didn't want to play the same games that Aaron had. She admitted to everything right away. She said it was all a big plot to kidnap Beverly and extort money. She denied having any part in killing her. That was all Aaron, she said. But she admitted she was part of the abduction. It had all started, she claimed, when she and Aaron had separated because they couldn't afford to move out of their home. They needed money and decided to start targeting specifically married women who worked alone in high-earning jobs. An online search had shown Beverly's face, and that, she said, was as quickly as they decided on who their victim would be. I wasn't going to have any contact with her because I didn't want to be involved, Crystal said. After Aaron forced her into the trunk, he took a picture of her, which he sent to Crystal, saying it's done. He eventually drove her out to their house and locked her in the bathroom, with Crystal standing guard with a stun gun. Crystal said Aaron started to panic, knowing she would be able to identify him from looking at the names on the prescriptions, and he just decided he had to kill her using duct tape. He wrapped it around her face, and it took her about 5 minutes to die. It goes without saying, but her last hours must have been beyond anything anyone could ever comprehend. Crystal said she initially refused to help him dispose of her body, but he convinced her by saying all she had to do was hold the light. The pair drove to a Walmart to buy a shovel, and then went to bury her. After this, they went to a Waffle House. Aaron Lewis and Crystal Lowry were charged with capital murder and kidnapping. Aaron pleaded not guilty, but Crystal wanted to accept the plea deal. She said she would testify against her ex-husband as well. Her charge was then reduced to a first-degree murder one, which in July 2015 she pleaded guilty to, receiving a 30-year prison sentence. Aaron showed no remorse at the thought of dragging her family through a trial. In fact, he loved the attention from the start. He relished in leading the officers on wild goose chases, telling lies and dropping breadcrumbs, which he would later retract. He was begging reporters to interview him, and truly thought he was the star of his own twisted show. Aaron, did you kill Beverly Carter? No, you did not. No, you did. I had a co-defendant. I haven't seen her for 2 days. Now they're showing pictures of this. I haven't seen her. I had a co-defendant, Trevor. Who's Trevor? He's Air Force at the military base. And what's your relation to Trevor? He's got texts back and forth to me and him, and then they wanted my phone. Why Beverly? Why Beverly? She was a rich broker. Do you have anything to say to the family? I'm sorry. What else do you want to say to her family? I'm sorry. Why Beverly? Because she was just a woman that worked alone, a rich broker. Did you kill her? No. You said you didn't trust anyone. Why do you have those fears? Because they said at the detective's office that I never requested an attorney, and they forgot to inform Little Rock police officers to lie for them. And the Little Rock officers say that I specifically asked for an attorney. Are you going to get co-counsel? I hope so. 14 hours of interrogation. After hiring and firing a lot of lawyers and 2 months of representing himself, Aaron's new defense team came up with a whole new story. Beverly had willingly gone to meet him for consensual sex, and she had accidentally died at his house. But Crystal was the killer, and not him. The court opened with the prosecution saying, unspeakable, terrifying suffering. She died a horrible, terrifying death that no one deserves. Beverly loved her life. The last thing Beverly experienced was unspeakable terror at that man's hands. The jury listened as Aaron's lawyers picked apart Beverly's life in the cruelest ways, trying anything they could to discredit her, her job, her relationship. Her financial issues and her marriage were all dissected, and they suggested these were all reasons for her to be unfaithful. Aaron's lawyer said, "You've got to look at this truthfully, not from a fantasy." Beverly was making bad decisions at this point in her life. Let's tell the truth about what's going on here. Everybody has a secret life, he said, suggesting that she had been having a midlife crisis, and going to meet with Aaron was part of this. As hurtful as this all was to hear, so many lies being told about someone so loved, her family and friends sat quiet and stoic. Carl took to the stand and defended his wife's name. They had had their issues. What couple didn't? But they did have an amazing relationship. His wife was his best friend, and he was hers. Aaron testified in his own defense, and said he had brought Beverly home with the intentions of sleeping together, and invited Crystal in as well. He said when he left the house briefly, he came back to find that Crystal had killed her. All he did, he said, was bury her, and the phone recording of Beverly's voice. It was all AI, he claimed. The more the prosecution pulled his story to shreds, the more aggressive and angry he became. His true self was now on show. Good evening. The trial for the man accused of killing Beverly Carter enters the third day, and the jury heard dramatic testimony today from the state's star witness. Jurors had been hearing from defendant Aaron Lewis's estranged wife, Crystal Lowry, who took a plea deal agreeing to testify against Lewis. Well, that's right, and court is actually still ongoing as we speak. Crystal Lowry is certainly doing her part to aid the prosecution today. The state's key witness, Lewis's wife, Crystal Lowry, said everything in Lewis's affidavit was a made-up story testifying Lewis and Lowry plotted to kidnap Carter and hold her for ransom, killing her when she had no money. Now the prosecution has called about 20 witnesses. Crystal testified that the plan had been for Aaron to kidnap Beverly and keep her in an abandoned part of the concrete plant while they made ransom demands. But she said they were unaware of changes at the plant that would make this plan impossible. With Beverly tied up in the back of his car, Aaron had to change his plans. Crystal said to him, "Where are you going to take her? Because I don't want her at the house." He didn't have anywhere to take her, and he was driving around, and he said he could get pulled over at any moment, and he needed to get off the road, she added. Aaron drove Beverly to his house, where the couple kept her bound with duct tape in the bathroom. Said she stood in there with Beverly as Aaron went back to the cement plant to get her purse and bank card. But by the time he got there were people around, so he had to abandon this. He drove back, and the couple forced Beverly to record a 12-second ransom message for Carl. This message never got sent to Carl, and he wouldn't hear it until after she was already dead. Despite his vile lies, the case against Aaron was as close to watertight as it could be. But the ever-so-confident prosecution would be faced with a huge blow. After sitting through hours of pretrial hearings, I can tell you prosecutors still have a lot of evidence to use against Lewis in trial, but there are some huge pieces of evidence now being thrown out. Due to errors in the way the searches of his home and car had been conducted, some of the major findings were not allowed to be admitted into evidence. This included her hair and duct tape in his car, and her phone being found at his house. 3 huge pieces of evidence, but they had to push on. Aaron's lawyers closed their arguments saying that she was not abducted and was there willingly. She was not kidnapped, and there's basically no evidence of that. The only honest and true verdict would be not guilty. A lot of what Aaron did was in an attempt to protect Crystal, his lawyers said. If nothing else, he's dedicated to Crystal. After an hour of deliberations, the jury unanimously found Aaron Lewis guilty of capital murder and kidnapping. Well, I was so thankful to be able to take the stand and tell everybody how amazing she was. But it's that, to love and to be resilient and against all odds fight. And if it's not an Aaron Lewis in your life, whatever it is, just fight and fight for your happiness and love the people that you're with. I spoke to the prosecutors right when they left the courtroom as well. And, through this, they got to know their family pretty well. Let's take a listen. First of all, let me tell you, they're a fantastic family, and I honestly say that. They're wonderful to work with, and it's hard not to get close to them. I mean, if you want to get to know Beverly, you have to get to know her family. And so that makes it difficult. But in the end, justice is served. I'm happy for them. I'm happy for Pulaski County, honestly. Well, we knew that, he had to tell a story. If there was any chance that the jury would find him not guilty, they were going to have to hear from him. I mean, it certainly was his decision to testify, yes. And that last person that you heard from was defense attorney Bill James. I had questioned him about his strategy of putting Aaron Lewis on the stand today. Now, according to the prosecutor's office, they don't believe Aaron did himself any favors by taking the stand. It was certainly what they called a turning point in the case. Alicia, you were in there at the time, but Bill James says that strategy was sound. It was necessary. He said Aaron Lewis had to get on stand to explain some of the things that he had written in that affidavit. At the request of the family, the prosecutor took the death penalty off the table, and he was sentenced to 2 life terms without any chance of parole. Carl Jr. gave a statement in court and said the way he had heard his mother being spoken about had disgusted and upset everyone. He said the only thing she had done that day was just go to work. Crystal Lowry petitioned to have her 30-year sentence reduced. But in 2020, this was denied. After his conviction, Aaron Lewis continues to be in and out of court and went on trial again in 2021 after assaulting state prison guards. Her family, friends, and colleagues continue to work hard to make sure Beverly's name is associated with nothing but good and can hopefully bring change. Carl Jr. made it his mission to campaign for safety, especially in jobs where people can be in vulnerable positions and working alone. He founded the nonprofit organization, the Beverly Carter Foundation. It is dedicated to the safety of real estate professionals and those they serve by providing research, information, consulting, training, and support to every level of the real estate industry. Nearly 7 years ago, Beverly Carter, a local realtor, was abducted and murdered after showing a house in Scott. Fast forward to today, realtors are using new technology aimed at keeping them safe. It's bittersweet. I wish that my mom had won that day. Carl Carter, Beverly Carter's son keeps his mom with him. Every day, through this keychain with her initials on the back. But it's not your typical piece of jewelry. Since losing mom in the fall of 2014, we've seen these great advances in technology. The jewelry made by Invisaware is actually a wearable safety device. With a double punch of the button, it alerts a list of your emergency contacts, and it shows them exactly where you are located. Invisaware, and of course, working alone. It's just a quick, easy way for them to discreetly let their circle of people know that they need assistance. Brittany Conley is a realtor with Remax in North Little Rock. She showed us the same Invisaware device. Instead, this one is a necklace. How many lives could you save out there? A piece of jewelry she never knew she needed until she became a realtor working alone. Especially now in a market that's booming and keeping her busier than ever. Carl believes with this new technology, others like his mom will have a fighting chance if ever faced with a situation like hers. It's so hard losing my mom. But, there is that peace to know that there is good that can come from such a tragedy. Her husband Carl says nights are the hardest. Going to sleep without his wife there. Watching the shows she would have loved. Waking up and remembering all over again that she isn't with him. Carl Jr. said it's a roller coaster, as you can imagine. Weird things give me the deepest feelings of grief I've ever known. But then I'll see a photo of her smile and feel better. In closing, call your mom. Be good to your mom. Call or text her daily. His wife Kim spoke of how sad it is that her grandchildren will grow up without her. Nothing made her happier than teaching them to ride bikes, helping them to tie their shoes, or sneaking them little treats to eat. She said those babies will never know how wonderful she was. We had so many good years left with her. The world is a darker place without her. Story 2. The 7th of May, 1998. The second floor apartment at 251 South 23rd Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 2 a.m. A call came in to the police. A neighbor had heard something concerning. A woman was screaming from her apartment. Shannon Sheba was screaming for someone to help her. The neighbor ran and banged on the door, saying he was going to call 911 immediately. He told the operator he could hear a choking sound. The call was a priority 1 call, the highest classification for someone in need of help. The neighbor then ran downstairs to the couple who lived below Shannon, hoping that with more than one person, they would be able to break down the door and help her. The woman who lived in that apartment said that her fiancé was away working, so Shannon's neighbor went back upstairs to wait for the police to get there. When the officers arrived 7 minutes later, the woman in the apartment below Shannon's led them upstairs, and as Shannon's apartment was now quiet, they suggested that nobody was actually in there. The neighbor from across the hall was adamant he had heard a voice that sounded like Shannon's, screaming for help, and the woman in the apartment below said she had most definitely heard a scuffle. The police suggested that maybe the scream had come not from Shannon's apartment, but from outside on the street. One of the officers then headed outside and used his flashlight to illuminate her balcony. The curtains were drawn and the door was shut. No amount of talking would convince the officers to break into her apartment. They said if they heard anything coming out of the apartment to immediately call 911, and within 5 minutes the police had left. That evening Shannon had been up studying hard for her final finance class exam as the first year of her doctoral program came to an end. She was due to meet with a study group at 9 o'clock the following day, have lunch with her brother Sean, then after taking her test head home to Maryland to see her parents. When Shannon's brother Sean arrived for lunch, friends from the study group said that she had failed to turn up and nobody had been able to get hold of her. Sean drove over to Shannon's and noticed that while the curtain to her balcony was closed, the balcony door was open. He rang her bell. No response. He immediately went to his friend Samantha's house to call his mother Vicky. Vicky said to go straight back to Shannon's building and find someone to let him in. Sean and Samantha went back and began ringing every doorbell in the building until one person came to the door, the neighbor who had called the police the previous night. Sean explained that his sister had failed to turn up for a study class and no one had heard from her. The neighbor suddenly went pale. He explained that during the night he had heard screams for help and a choking sound, but he hadn't been able to convince the officers to go into her apartment. With not a moment to lose, they went straight to Shannon's apartment and broke down the door. 23-year-old Shannon Sheba was lying, naked, face down on her bed. She had been raped and murdered. Sean collapsed when he found her body. Samantha called Vicky, who in turn called her husband Sylvester, to tell him what had happened to their daughter. Shannon Sheba was a gifted child, and this had shown itself very early on. By 18 months old, she was able to recite the alphabet and say it backwards. By the age of 3, she was reading at a level most second graders could read at. She was happy, bright, and inquisitive, someone who always wanted to learn and know as much as she could. She was consistently top of her class, and served as president of her high school, speaking in front of the city council in support of funding for education. I am a senior and the Student Government Association president at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School this year. In November, my friend Stephanie and I were the only students to testify at your public hearing on the energy tax. I am here once again to testify for education funding in the FY93 budget. She even got to meet President George H.W. Bush as he sought re-election. Shannon would later be accepted into Duke University, where she was also president of her freshman class and co-captain of the equestrian team, having excelled in horseback riding too. 3 years later, she graduated with an incredible triple major in economics, philosophy, and mathematics. Alongside her incredible academic achievements, Shannon had a strong moral compass and a deep commitment to social justice. When at the age of 22, she earned a full scholarship to the prestigious Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Her aim was to have a career in finance to help those most in need. Before starting in her program, she and her father made the trip from Maryland to Philadelphia to speak with the housing office to try and find a nice, safe place in town for her to live. They were recommended Center City. It was where a lot of the grad students lived and was deemed to be a safe part of the city. That day they found an apartment she loved and put a deposit down. In early May, just a few days before her death, Shannon was followed around Rittenhouse Square by a man. She had walked round and around trying to lose him, so he wouldn't see where she lived, or try and gain access to her apartment. Little did she or anyone know there was a serial rapist on the loose. The modus operandi was always the same. The victim would be a young woman of college age. The attacker would break into their apartment before blindfolding and attacking them. A woman told police that a man had broken into her apartment via a window. He'd climbed on top of her, but she had been able to persuade him not to rape her. She was even able to provide the police with one of his hairs, but this hair was not tested for 18 months. After going for a night out with friends, the victim went home and climbed into bed. She would later be awakened to find herself with wet hair and stripped naked. Her neck had bruises and the blood vessels in her eyes were burst. It was initially called a burglary by the police. The victim told police that as she had slept, a man had climbed through her window, put a pillow cover over her face and a belt around her neck before raping her and fleeing. The stains on the sheet were tested, but they were not linked to any other victims until January of 1999, as the DNA from each case had been held on 2 incompatible computers. August 13, 1997, the 1700 block of Pine Street. A woman had woken up to find a man in her bedroom. He put one hand on her neck and another over her mouth. He put a pillow over her face and raped her. DNA taken from this scene was linked to the attack from the 6th of August. As the police looked into Shannon's murder, they tried to piece together what had happened on the night she was killed. After studying, she had started running a bath for herself, leaving a paper on the side, and settled in to relax for the evening. Her second-floor apartment had a small balcony door, and the tree near the balcony had barbed wire coiled around it to avoid people climbing the tree and gaining access to her balcony. It seemed that what the intruder had done was press his way up the gap, which was just 3 feet, between her building and next door, before swinging onto her balcony. Her screen door was locked, but to combat the humidity, the balcony door was open. It was clear that Shannon had fought her killer. Books had been knocked off from where they had been at the side of her bed. She had also managed to draw blood from the assailant, which was on the wall, bed, and balcony. He had also stolen several items, including a pen, a camera, and jewelry. On the evening after Shannon's murder, her parents arrived at the apartment at around 7 p.m. The street was heaving with police cars and journalists. They pushed past the media outlets who insensitively threw questions at the grieving couple, and then met with 2 detectives from the Philadelphia Police's homicide unit. Her parents were then taken to the station to be questioned separately about Shannon, and if they knew of anyone who had wanted to harm her. They were then told that they would need to stay overnight, as Shannon's body would need to be identified the next day. They were due to be taken to the morgue at 9 a.m., but weren't picked up until 1:30 p.m., which therefore delayed the autopsy until 5 p.m. By this point, the coroner's office was closed for the weekend, so her devastated parents were told they would not be able to release Shannon's body until Monday. After calls to various officials, They were able to have their daughter's body released to them on Saturday morning, so they could begin preparations for her funeral. As the investigation continued, the Philadelphia police issued flyers to various shops in search of the Canon camera that had been stolen from her apartment on the night she was murdered. Also stolen were hundreds of CDs, a pen, jewelry, and a backpack. A fellow student from Wharton was questioned, but DNA soon ruled them out. Vicky and Sylvester are Shannon's parents. As devout Catholics turned to their faith in the face of such immense pain. We went to Mass on Saturday evening, and the assistant pastor announced at the beginning before the Mass started what had happened to Shannon. We go into the Mass, and I got myself in trouble when we got to the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us, the prayer reads. In the Catholic Mass you say that out loud. I'm a pretty literal guy, words mean things to me. I couldn't say that out loud, Sylvester said. A week after her death, Vicky and Sylvester were allowed to clear out her apartment, and they were also given an update. Based on the evidence found at the scene, they said once they caught the man responsible, he would almost certainly be subject to a first-degree murder charge. The police had initially believed that her killer was an ex-suitor, and this had been a so-called crime of passion, but this didn't yield any leads at all. In the autumn, Shannon's case was featured 3 times on America's Most Wanted in the hope that someone would come forward with something. It seemed like her case wasn't really going anywhere. That was until a call was made, but it wasn't made to the police. It was made to the Philadelphia Inquirer. An anonymous source wanted to give them some information about the investigation into Shannon's murder. The person said that the police had blown off 2 similar attacks on women who had been assaulted in their own homes, but not killed. The anonymous source said that had the police picked up on the pattern earlier, maybe they would have been able to stop him before his crimes had escalated to murder. The journalists decided to dig deeper into these claims, and what they found was alarming. It was revealed that there was a culture where victims of rape were ignored and belittled. Detectives had filed away rape cases under a non-criminal classification code, meaning that many went unaddressed. One former detective with the Philadelphia police had referred to the sex crimes unit as the lying bitches unit, and said publicly that women lied about rape about half the time. It was only after 2 years and a series of investigations by the Philadelphia Inquirer that the police admitted this was not just isolated sloppiness, but a serious issue with culture and attitude within the force. Linking the attacks to the one offender alone had taken the police 17 months, in spite of the same MO each time and DNA left at the scene in each instance. DNA was tested in 2 of the cases, but only following the report from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Both of these cases, the journalists learned, had been classified as non-crimes. These investigations by the Philadelphia Inquirer would go on to be nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. 2 of the previous rapes had been filed under the classification 2701. 2701 was a non-criminal category. It was deemed to be trivial and not in need of further action by the police. And as a result of these investigations, every single case filed under 2701 from the last 5 years, due to the statute of limitations, were looked into again. 863 were reclassified as other sexual offenses. 681 were reclassified as rape. Sylvester said that it was his belief that the intention of the killer had not been to murder Shannon, but when he heard the officers knocking at the door, he had strangled her to silence her and then escaped via the balcony. He added that had the public been warned about the serial sex attacks, she wouldn't have chosen to live there. If the previous rapes had been pieced together and connected to the same person, one can only imagine if the response may have been different. One of the officers who had gone out to her apartment that night would later say that he would have called for the supervisor if he had known the call was about a woman who had been screaming for help. The other officer said that only if he had heard the screams himself would he have forced the door open. It would take the detectives 8 months to link the 5 rapes from the one area. A former police chief would later remark that the department had been god-awful in dealing with sex crimes and reform was long overdue. One of the victims had been able to catch a glimpse of her attacker, and a composite sketch was drawn up, and a reward would also be offered of $40,000. In July of 1999, FBI profilers were brought on board. The profilers believed that this man was very familiar with his surroundings and the wider neighborhood. He was fit and agile, and likely had a history of voyeurism. 15 months after Shannon was killed, the man now dubbed the Center City Rapist struck again. He removed 14 screws from a set of bars to gain entry into an apartment on the ground floor and attacked the woman inside. Shannon's family would talk to the parents of the victim and offer their support. One of the officers working on the case had seen an episode of Forensic Files where a serial rapist had been caught using geographic profiling. It had to be worth a shot. He reached out to the profiler who had appeared in the episode, Kim Rosmo, hoping he would be able to help. By foot and by helicopter, Kim had looked at the area in question, and then he put the addresses of the rape victims and Shannon's address into his program, which was able to provide several areas that the rapist was likely to live in. The police went to those areas and put up the composite sketch of the man they were looking for, but then the attacks suddenly stopped. By this time, the police in Philadelphia had come to the realization that these attacks had been committed by one individual. It was the diligence of one nurse conducting a forensic medical exam that had cracked it. He had licked the victim's breast, and the nurse had meticulously swabbed her, which finally picked up his DNA. The rapes would soon start up again, though. More women would be attacked, but hundreds of miles away in a different state. Fort Collins, Colorado, May 10, 2001. A woman had woken up to a man in her apartment. He had tied her up, covered her eyes, and sexually assaulted her. Within just a few weeks, there would be another attack on the same street. The victim's husband, who was tragically dying from cancer, and their son, had gone away camping, and she was home alone. The man stood outside and watched, trying to see if there was a dog or a man in the apartment. While she sat at her computer, she heard a noise that made her stop. He quickly launched his attack. He covered her eyes and forced her into the bedroom. He calmly whispered that if she cooperated, he wouldn't hurt her. She said she remembered thinking that she needed to get through this for her son. He couldn't lose both his parents. After the attack, he ran away, and she was able to call 911. Please pick my call up. Call me up. No call 911. The attacks continued in Fort Collins, but he had started leaving evidence, like a hat, DNA, and someone had also seen his car driving away. During one of the attacks, he left fingerprints on the balcony. The fingerprints and descriptions of the attacker were sent to police agencies throughout the United States to see if any other departments had dealt with anything similar or had any further information on file. A police clerk in Philadelphia picked up on this and immediately thought of the Center City rapist. The DNA taken from the rape test kits in Colorado were compared to the blood in Shannon's apartment. It revealed the truth. They had been committed by the same person. They scoured databases to find men who had been in the areas in question at the time of the attacks and murder. 319 men were identified as having made financial transactions in Philadelphia, then in Fort Collins during the times in question. They looked at men between 20 and 30 years old that had been living in that part of Philadelphia to try and narrow the pull down, which it did, to 83 people. The list was sent to police in Colorado. This was combined with the list of suspects the police had made there, a list that had more than 800 people on it. But before they could be checked, the rapist struck again, and in September of 2001, the police in Colorado received a letter. Part of it read, "I'm sorry, but I can't let you catch me yet. Not in Colorado. I don't even like it here. I'm not a fan of cold weather. I don't even like going up to Fort Collins anymore. You guys are everywhere, I admit. I want to get caught. I don't like what I do. It keeps me at a distance from people, and I can't talk to anyone. It gets lonely." The letter also contained details that had not been released to the public. These were things that only the assailant, the victim, and the police knew. Frustratingly for the detectives, there were no fingerprints or DNA on the envelope or letter. It was determined that this was a ploy from the offender to throw the detectives off track and make them focus on the letter that wasn't going to yield any results. With the DNA showing that the crimes had been committed by one person, and knowing that there was a 5-year statute of limitations on rape under Pennsylvania law, the authorities filed a warrant against the unknown attacker. More than 1,000 tips had come in, one of which was from a woman who said she had dated a man who looked like the person on the sketch. His name was Troy Graves. Another tip came through. A neighbor thought the car used by the rapist was similar to that of her neighbor's. Her neighbor's name was Troy Graves. This was a name also on the suspect list. In Philadelphia, he had worked for a bank near to where the victims of the Center City rapist had lived. Troy had joined the armed forces in 1999 and did basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, and also attended a missile maintenance school in California. He eventually ended up in Wyoming. A month after he arrived at the Air Force Base, he had been reprimanded after an allegation was made that he had tried to enter the dorm room of a female Air Force captain. On some occasions, he would break into someone's apartment, watch them for 15 minutes, and then leave. Although he was based in Wyoming, he lived in Fort Collins, Colorado, just a couple of miles away from where the women had been attacked. An ex-girlfriend told the police that he had struggled with sleep and would take walks late at night, coming home with scratches and bruises. She was concerned and tried to get him to explain what was going on, but he wouldn't and gave various excuses such as falling over. The officers knew that the man who had killed Shannon had A-positive blood, the same blood type as Troy Graves. Detective Neil Hism had been dispatched to Troy's house on Ash Drive. Nobody was home, so he left a business card. Troy had been married for about a year, and when his wife got home and found the card, she called Detective Hism. She explained that her husband was working on the base, but had a dental appointment at 3 o'clock. She called Troy, who in turn got in contact with the police and agreed to go in to talk to detectives. He left the base to go and pick his wife up before heading to the station, not knowing he was already being followed by officers. Detective Hism asked if he would be willing to be fingerprinted. He said he felt a little weird about it and wanted time to think. He asked questions about your fingerprints and DNA. Am I still free to leave? Yes. I'd like to just go home and get some sleep, sir. That's okay. Well, I'll tell you what. At this point right here, you're no longer free to go. Okay, I'm going to detain you. When his fingerprints were taken, the pieces of the puzzle would finally fall into place. This matched the set of prints found from the victim's balcony in Colorado. His blood was also taken, and this was a match for the DNA found in Shannon's apartment. What you do is go ahead and turn around for me. Lock your hands behind your head. Spread your hands. Okay. Do you have your weapons on you? Do you have anything in your purse? No. Okay. On the 23rd of April, 2002, 29-year-old Air Force Senior Airman Troy Graves was arrested in connection with 6 sex attacks in Colorado. 3 days after his arrest, he was charged with 27 counts, including sexual assault, robbery, and kidnap. Also that day, he was presented with the charges that had been filed against him in Philadelphia. The 50 counts included rape, aggravated assault, burglary, and murder. It later emerged that one of his ex-girlfriends had seen the composite sketch, as had her little girl, who had pointed at the poster and said, "Mommy, that's Troy." It was also revealed that Troy, who had lived at the 4100 block of Baltimore Avenue in Philadelphia, had been stopped by the police for questioning in January of 1999, but was released not long after. It wasn't clear initially where he was going to be tried first, and while the process of extraditing him to Pennsylvania had already gotten underway, the final decision would lie with the Colorado governor. Not long after he was arrested, he told his lawyer that if the death penalty was taken off the table, he would enter pleas of guilty to the rape and murder of Shannon and the rapes and sexual assaults against the other women. He also finally confessed to what had happened that night in Shannon's apartment. He told detectives that he had climbed through the sliding glass door of her balcony and surprised her as she was in the bathroom. After the attack, she had tried to fight him off, biting his left ring finger, drawing blood, and she also scratched his face. Troy said he put his arms around her neck to overpower her and stop her, but she fell off the bed. I countered by jumping back on the bed, on my knees, which didn't allow her feet to touch the floor. Okay, it was at that point I thought I might have broken her neck. He then said he heard someone knocking at her door 2 separate times, but said he didn't hear the police knock. He also said he didn't see the police as he ran off. He said that he had closed her balcony door, and although it was shut when the police got there initially following the call from the neighbor, Sean said that when he went to her apartment, the balcony door was open. The Sheba family argued that this suggested he was still in the apartment when the police got there and left the door open after he fled. At a news conference, the district attorney Lynn M. Abraham gave a new explanation for this discrepancy. Sean had opened the door because he was sick at the sight of Shannon's body. Sean rubbished these claims, saying that's just absolutely preposterous. He added that he had noticed her door open from the outside before he even went in, and that he didn't go near the balcony door. The friend who was with him when her body was found also said in a deposition that she too had noticed the balcony door was open before going inside. Although his daughter's killer had now been caught, Sylvester said that the Philadelphia police was in need of change. That part of the case is closed, but the city of Philadelphia needs to change the way it does its policing, he said. As already mentioned, one of the punishments on the table in Pennsylvania was the death penalty. Rooted in their Catholic faith, Vicky and Sylvester were deeply opposed to capital punishment. It was reported that Shannon's family had faced what was referred to as unrelenting pressure to seek the death penalty against Troy. Vicky referred to the experience as being re-victimized by the debate around capital punishment, and how Sam felt it was the only way for them to receive justice. The death penalty wasn't going to honor Shannon's life, and it wasn't going to bring her back. I thought about everything we ever taught Shannon to believe, to turn the other cheek, to show compassion and be forgiving. If you have a set of principles and then don't live by them when you're tested, were they ever your principles to begin with, she said. Sylvester said, I believe words have meaning, and should be taken seriously. Upon reflection, I took the meaning of, as we forgive those who trespass against us, and the teaching of St. Matthew's Gospel, telling us to turn the other cheek, to be fundamental Christian principles. Some ask, would Jesus do? Often the answer isn't as easy as the question suggests. For us, when it comes to executions, the answer is clear. As we thought through the issues and reflected on our upbringing, we decided we would not be party to a death penalty prosecution. Vicky said that after her death, was sitting on her shoulder telling her, don't let him kill all of you too. She was telling me to take all that energy and do good with it. She said that by going for the death penalty, she felt it would murder her at the same time as him, by taking another life to satisfy one's own ends. Shannon's parents also made contact with the victims of Troy graves from Colorado and Pennsylvania, and they were all in support of the couple in not asking for the death penalty. Troy's attorney thanked Shannon's family for their public and vocal opposition to capital punishment. This vocal opposition became the focus of much media interest. In one instance, a talk radio host and local lawyer, Michael Smircornish, published an open letter addressed to Vicky in the Daily News. He said that Shannon's killer should pay with his life, saying he did not believe that anyone's citizen's feelings should determine that decision, even if that citizen is a victim. That would result in disparate sentencing in society. Society's interests require serious consideration of a death sentence. We never want another promising young woman to have her life cut short by a murderous thug, but we must consider the deterrence that a death sentence in this case might provide. Sylvester and Vicky wrote an open letter back, explaining their opposition to capital punishment. Firstly, as Catholics, they held life to be sacred. Under the circumstances of our daughter's death, our beliefs about appropriate punishment have been severely tested, but we have no choice but to adhere to our principles. Secondly, they said that capital punishment was often applied in discriminatory and arbitrary ways in our society. And finally, they said that the issues with the police in failing to link the offenses and classifying reports of rape and sexual assault as non-crimes had resulted in a failure to warn the community and added to the risk for people who lived there. They referenced Shannon being followed around just 2 nights before she was killed. Had she known that a serial rapist was working her neighborhood, she would have been far more concerned about this incident than she was. She likely would have called the police, the open letter said. They added that if Smircornish wanted safety for the community, he should have called for accountability from the police regarding their handling of cases linked to the Center City rapist, and for changes in how they deal with sex attacks. Shannon's family also took legal action against the Philadelphia police for negligence. The federal lawsuit said that the police had missed the opportunity to save her or catch Troy Graves when the call from the neighborhood came in. The lawyer for the family had told the federal jury that if police in Philadelphia had recognized that the crimes were being committed by one person or taken sex offenses more seriously, Shannon's murder could have been prevented. He told the jury that the officers had originally misclassified one of the sex attacks as a burglary. Some of the forensic evidence hadn't been analyzed. Allegations of rape had been downgraded or ignored, and police weren't aware of a serial offender. The chief deputy city solicitor, Shelley R. Smith, said that the police had acted properly and the city was not responsible for Shannon's death. In 2004, it was reported that the city of Philadelphia was not liable for the death of Shannon Sheba, following her family's lawsuit against them. Sylvester was deeply critical of the police department in Philadelphia. I think the police department in Fort Collins from the beginning of the attacks comported themselves in an extremely professional manner, which should be an embarrassment to Philadelphia. He argued that very few were holding the police to account. They won't clean it up, and someone needs to demand they clean it up. On May 17, 2002, Troy Graves received a life sentence in Fort Collins, Colorado, for the sexual assaults against 7 women. The district judge, Terrence Gilmore, dealing with the cases in Colorado, said he had decided on a life sentence because of the nature of the offenses and the level of fear he had instilled in his victims. It was now time for Troy Graves to face justice in Philadelphia. He entered a plea of guilty to 6 counts of rape and to the murder of Shannon Sheba. He told the court to the city of Philadelphia and the victims and the families and friends of the victims, "I'm sorry. My deepest sympathy to the Sheba family for their loss, and I thank them for how they've been throughout this." As the court proceedings played out, the second victim of Troy Graves sat at the back of the courtroom. She had been attacked in July of 1997. She'd woken up to find herself covered in bruises and naked. Her case had initially been classed as a burglary. As the details of her case were read out, she broke down in tears. She said after the hearing, "I'm glad it's over." Judge Benjamin Lerner sentenced Troy Graves to life in prison with no possibility of parole for Shannon's murder, plus 60 to 120 years for the rape. Shannon's parents welcomed the life sentence. That's exactly what we wanted. We didn't want Graves having the flexibility of ever attacking anyone else again, and that's the satisfaction we got, Sylvester said. One thing that had been made so abundantly clear during this investigation was that there needed to be a massive change in the police. An external oversight committee was set up which independently reviewed how the police handled cases of rape. Making up the committee were experts in women's legal rights, advocates for children and staff from the Rape Crisis Center. Carol Tracy, the executive director of the Philadelphia-based Women's Law Project, was asked by the Philadelphia police to help in the creation of the committee and became a leading member. It brought transparency and independent scrutiny at a time when the public had lost confidence in the police. "It is another model departments should learn from," she said. The committee looked into rape reports that had been classified as unfounded, which meant that the report was deemed to not meet the criteria for rape or sexual assault, or that it had been made up. In the late 90s, the police would file almost a fifth of cases away as unfounded. This was alongside the hundreds that had been incorrectly classified under wrong codes and then buried. The sex crimes unit used by the police was originally based in a former horse stable, and then in a disused military armory. After having invasive and difficult forensic exams at the hospital, victims would then have to sit and wait in police corridors, often seeing their alleged attackers sat there in handcuffs. One of those who took part in the initial case review was Lieutenant Tom McDevitt. "I remember the day I said, 'How did we get this bad? What did we do?' It was eye-opening, like a smack in the face to us. It was a humbling thing that we said, wow, if we really want to be this good, we have to change." Senior Philadelphia sex crimes officer, former Lieutenant Michael Boyle said, "People had become complacent. Officers were being careless and in many cases lazy and weren't even looking at cases as individual women, but just as a filing code or an overwhelming workload." The culture of police was not helped by a lack of supervision and oversight, poor training, and little funding. Boyle called the attitude that had developed inexcusable and indefensible. If you look in the city of Philadelphia, there were positive developments. "For us, it came at a tremendous cost," Sylvester said. The reforms seen in the handling of sex crimes in Philadelphia were also implemented in other places like New York and even Ottawa, Canada, where independent groups reviewed how investigations were carried out. Since 2016, the Ottawa Rape Crisis Center had launched 12 pilot programs, all based on the model used in Philadelphia. Sylvester and Vicky Sheba would continue their activism in pushing for the death penalty to be repealed. Vicky's anti-death penalty activism took her to more than 20 states to tell Shannon's story and her story of her experience with the justice system. In a display of extraordinary grace, Vicky has also said that she wanted to talk to Troy Graves. "I want him to know that we aren't angry people with all sorts of vengeance. We want him to find peace." In 2011, Vicky was named as Abolitionist of the Year by the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. This case is as infuriating as it is heartbreaking. From the way sex attacks were handled to knowing how much Shannon had fought for her life, it is tragic to know that it took something so awful with so many victims for the systems to finally change. Troy Graves will spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did to these women, and there is perhaps some solace in knowing he will never be able to hurt another woman again. As Sylvester said, the hardest thing to accept is that our daughter did everything she could to call for help. Shannon was a good person who went out of her way to help almost anyone. The one time she needed help, the system didn't work. But one positive thing to come from all of this tragedy is the amazing compassion and work of the Sheba family. For them to hold true to their principles, show such grace and strength, and not seek revenge in the face of such an appalling crime is frankly incredible. Shannon Sheba had her whole life ahead of her, and who knows what amazing things she would have gone on to achieve. but for her to accomplish all that she did in her 23 years was a testament to who she was as a person. As Vicky said, if you could have written down a wish list and said, "Dear God, this is what I would love for my first child," I got everything on that list I would have wanted. Story May 3rd, 2010, the small city of Guthrie in Oklahoma. It was a Thursday nearing the end of the week, and everyone was slowly trickling out of their houses and heading off to work and school. But just before 8 a.m., a 911 call came in from 402 West Orbit Drive. A call that threw the usually quiet neighborhood into chaos. The person on the phone was 15-year-old Kaylee Fryer. Kaylee had found her father, 50-year-old Lewis Fryer, known to everyone as Lewis, dead in his bedroom. It looked like it was a home invasion gone horribly wrong. Things were smashed, and his car had been stolen from off the driveway. Police got to the house and found the grisly scene. Blood absolutely covered the bedroom walls, floor, bed frame, and door. Lewis had clearly been dead for a few hours. The room was in total disarray, and Lewis had put up a fight. He was covered in defensive wounds. He had stabbed wounds to his neck and back. The murder weapon had been a knife from inside his own kitchen, and it now appeared to be missing from the spot in the knife rack. His blankets were still wrapped around him as he had fallen out of bed and onto the floor, and the position of the blood in the bed told investigators he was likely asleep when his killer started attacking him. He didn't see or hear anything coming until he was fighting for his life. It had been Lewis, Kaylee, and her 18-year-old brother Keith for the last 13 years. Lewis and his ex-wife Tricia had split in 1997 as her life had sadly spiraled into drug addiction. She was going in and out of prison and Lewis was given full custody, but he encouraged the kids to see her even more than the courts granted. He wanted them to keep as good a relationship with her as they could. Keith said their dad was their constant, a stand-up parent who did everything for them. In between looking after two now teenage kids, he worked as a designer for a picture framing company. He was a big sports fan and had loved fishing from a young age. Friends said he was just an all-round salt-of-the-earth guy with a great sense of humor. At 4.02 West Orbit Drive, Kaylee sat in the police car with detectives keeping her from contaminating anything, and the crime scene examiners combed through the Fryer house. She said she couldn't think of anyone who would want to do this to him. "Everyone likes my dad," she said. "Now who would want to kill your dad?" "I don't know. See any knives?" "No. Everybody likes my dad." The 15-year-old said nothing out of the ordinary had happened that night. They'd spent the evening together eating dinner and watching a film, and at about 10:30 p.m. they both went to bed. She'd slept through the whole night and heard nothing, waking up at 7 a.m. She said normally her dad would wake her up for school, but the house was so silent, no sounds of the TV or him making breakfast. She went looking for him and had walked right into the awful scene in his room. As they looked around, they noticed there were no signs of a forced entry. No locks were damaged and no windows were broken. It looked as if the killer had got in through an unlocked door, and then escaped out of the back door, as there was a tiny amount of blood on there. As with all cases, you look at the people closest to the victim, often a partner or an ex. So they turned their attention to his ex-wife Tricia. Police had to consider the possibility that maybe this was over custody. Although initially a little hard to get hold of, she voluntarily came in for an interview, and it was obvious she was nothing to do with it. Tricia was happy for Lewis having full custody, given everything going on in her life. She was grateful to him, and all things considered, they had a very amicable relationship. There was simply no motive there at all. Kaylee then revealed that a few days before, her older brother Keith had left the house after having a fight at school, which had caused an argument with their dad. Lewis had always made it clear that the minute either of them turned 18, there would be adult consequences for things, and getting into a physical fight at school was one of those things. He was disappointed in his son, and he said he needed to leave the house. Keith went to stay with a friend, but everyone knew it was only a temporary thing. Lewis said he would of course welcome him back if he accepted responsibility and didn't do anything like that again. So could this be a potential motive? They headed to Guthrie High School and detectives escorted Keith into the principal's office, where he was informed of his dad's passing. His reaction was raw and genuine. He had no idea what had happened. He started screaming that they were lying, getting so angry and upset he threw his chair against the wall. He was heartbroken, especially with this all happening after several days of them not speaking and being in a good place. Keith was also ruled out when his friends confirmed he was with them all night. He hadn't been near the house in days. His car was the next thing to look at. They put out a be on the lookout for it, but it had now been 8 hours since it was stolen, so it could be a big hunt. Police scoured the neighborhoods and talked to those who knew the Fryer family. He hadn't even had so much as a minor dispute with a colleague, let alone have anyone that might want to do this. But one thing they could now rule out was robbery. The crime scene did not point to this being a random attack. There was no break-in. Kaylee had been left unharmed, and despite his bedroom being a mess, nothing apart from the car had been taken, and it seemed that that was more for a getaway rather than wanting to get any money for it. Two of Kaylee's friends then asked to talk to the police, and what they said would change the course of the investigation. They revealed that Kaylee had in recent years become rebellious to the point where Lewis couldn't control her at all. She was drinking a lot and taking drugs, throwing parties when her dad wasn't home and getting into fights. She'd been expelled multiple times and hadn't been in school for months. Kaylee was not somebody you wanted to mess with. People knew if it came down to do it, she wouldn't be afraid to throw hands or get in someone's face, her friend Gina said. Lewis had been trying to change things and be stricter with curfews and rules, but Kaylee hated it and was refusing to play ball. Kaylee's diary was discovered in her room, and she had written multiple entries about how much she hated her dad. One entry even read, "You're dead to me." She had recently gotten it into her head that if she went to live with her mother, she would be able to get away with more and just do what she wanted. And one thing that just hadn't sat well with the police since the start of the investigation was how had Kaylee slept through such a violent attack. A huge fight, things had been broken, her dad likely shouting for help, and then his car speeding away. It seemed impossible. Even her brother Keith couldn't stop thinking about it, and he didn't know what had happened, but he knew something wasn't right. He said when Kaylee and his mother had come to the school to pick him up, he could tell that Kaylee knew more than she was letting on. As soon as I saw Kaylee's face, I just knew she was lying about something, and I was immediately suspicious. I told her I didn't want to talk to her, and I felt physically sick, he said. He added his children, my sister, and I were like partners in crime, and would sneak out together, but as we grew older we grew apart, and she began to go off the rails drinking and taking drugs. I tried to speak to her about it, and she definitely had mental health issues her entire life. She didn't like being told what to do, and she was a problem from an early age. We all knew she had a dark side. She was quick to fight anyone, and could fly off the handle. There had definitely been issues between father and daughter, and although Kaylee was the only person they could find that had any real problems with Lewis, they still didn't believe that physically this was something she would be able to do, but they believed she knew who his killer was. Her friends were able to point the police in a new direction. Kaylee had had a 21-year-old boyfriend for a few months, Jerry Jerome Childs Jr., known as Jay. He had no current address, no job, and no money, so Kaylee would often sneak him into their house during the night, and some sources say Jay was even married at the time. Despite her efforts to hide him, Lewis ended up finding out about Jay. He confronted Kaylee and made it very clear he did not want them seeing each other, nor was he ever welcome in his home. It would never be something he would condone. The following day he found and confronted Jay, as well as he was walking around their neighborhood, and Lewis told him the same thing. In the state of Oklahoma, their age difference meant a sexual relationship between the two of them violated statutory rape laws, and with this they now had much more of a motive. But without a set address, they knew finding Jay would prove difficult. They finally got a hit on the be on the lookout for the car. It had been abandoned in Oklahoma City. It had some damage on it, and the keys were still inside. Nothing of evidentiary value was found elsewhere, however. No murder weapon or DNA. Shortly after this, 21-year-old Jay was located in Oklahoma City as well. He had called a friend asking for a lift home. He said he was stuck there and had no way of getting back. Thanks to the friend, she convinced him to stay where he was, let the police come and get him, and voluntarily participate in an interview. He told the investigators he had absolutely nothing to do with the murder at all, but eventually he admitted he was at the Fryer home that night after Kaylee snuck him in. He said Lewis had woken up, found the pair together, and tried to attack him with a golf club in the hallway. Jay had grabbed a knife in the kitchen in self-defense. Authorities let him talk a while longer. They already knew from the bloodstained evidence in the bedroom that Lewis had been killed in bed. His feet were up against the closet, which was where his golf clubs were stored, and the clubs clearly hadn't been used for a while. They sat there collecting dust. There was no blood in the hallway, where Jay said the fight broke out. It was all contained to the bedroom, so self-defense of any sort it was clearly not. Then Jay changed his story and said he had gone to the home to rob Lewis, but when he woke up Jay panicked and stabbed him. This story still didn't make any sense. They pushed him more, and he finally admitted that Kaylee had convinced him to kill her father, and they had carried out the plot together. She had not been in the room, but she had told him exactly what to do, what time and where to find the knife. He said Kaylee had begged him many times to kill her dad, but he had always refused. That was until the 15-year-old dropped a bombshell and told Jay she was pregnant with his child. Billy Wheeler, the Guthrie City attorney, said everything Kaylee pitched as a plan would have made perfect sense to Jay. This is somebody that's being kicked out of his house, and Kaylee offers him a plan. They're going to live with her mother. They're going to be happy. They're going to have a place to live, and this just offers him something he can't turn down, he said. After Kaylee and Lewis went to bed, she went and unlocked the door for him. Jay crept and grabbed the knife and went into Lewis's room. He said he hesitated for a moment, but when Lewis started to stir, he just launched at him and started stabbing him. After Lewis was dead, Jay stole the car and set off for Oklahoma City. He also threw the knife out of the window on the way. Kaylee had told him she would meet him there. He abandoned the car when he got there and walked to Crossroads Mall. He called Kaylee just before 7 a.m. to tell her where she could find him. She then called the police and set in motion what she thought was a fail-safe plan. Less than 24 hours after Louis Fryer was found dead, Charles was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. They then headed to Trisha's house where Kaylee was staying, and she too was arrested and later charged with first-degree murder as well. While in custody, they pulled Kaylee's phone data apart, which showed that she had called Jay right before calling 911. They knew from the autopsy, and what Jay had said that Louis had been killed at around 3 a.m. Despite her saying she was asleep, her phone data showed that she had been on the internet at that time. There was a vast amount of calls back and forth between her and Jay, and the timings he had given to the police were slowly adding up. Kaylee, still denying any involvement, asked for a lawyer right away and pleaded not guilty. Her jail call started being closely monitored, and it was during one of these calls that it came out that Kaylee was not actually pregnant at all. It was just something she told Jay to ensure that he would follow through on killing her father and give him more of a reason to stay with her. When Jay found out that this had been a lie, detectives said he seemed genuinely upset, and after this he told them he had changed his mind about everything. He agreed to testify against Kaylee in exchange for a plea deal. Investigators say 15-year-old Kaylee Fryer convinced her boyfriend to do it, but now Jerry Childs is testifying against her. And Eyewitness News 5's Amanda Guerra spoke to the girl's mother, why she says Kaylee is innocent. No matter what anyone says, Trisha Wheeler Fryer believes her daughter Kaylee is innocent. I don't think she has any involvement. Kaylee, just 15 years old, is charged with first-degree murder in her father's death. Prosecutors say she convinced her boyfriend, 21-year-old Jerry Childs, to kill her dad. Today in court, Childs told the judge the night of the murder Kaylee left the back door open for him and told him where he could find a knife. Trisha says it's all lies. I firmly believe that. Why? I mean, not because I'm just her mother. It's because I did meet Jerry Childs, and everything I've seen him say on the stand is lies. Kaylee's attorney says there's no forensic evidence tying her to the scene. He also says the prosecutor's entire argument is based on the word of a self-described gangster. But what Childs and an OSBI agent said in court was enough to convince the judge there's enough evidence to go to trial. Now Kaylee will face life in prison for her father's death. I can't wait for the end result. The truth will come out. In July 2010, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was handed a life sentence with a chance of parole. In May 2011, the now 16-year-old Kaylee Fryer went on trial, still pleading not guilty. Despite her age at the time of the crime, she was tried as an adult. She was later found guilty of first-degree murder. Today at the Logan County Courthouse, Kaylee Fryer was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Her attorney says even he's confused, saying Kaylee says she misses her dad. You know, she misses her father very much, and she has really been as flabbergasted as anybody else over this entire case. In court today, Kaylee was hard to recognize. Once a blonde, her hair now dark, never once glancing at the crowd where her aunts and grandfather sat. This is the most emotion she's shown in front of the judge and jury. Kaylee wiped away a few silent tears when she heard her sentence. Kaylee's attorney doesn't think a 15-year-old girl should go to a prison with the average inmate's 37. The biggest problem is that she's going to serve a very long sentence and is likely to survive it. And my concern is, what kind of a person are we going to reintroduce into society? We tried to speak with Kaylee Fryer's family as well. They said they had nothing to say to the media, and then they set it for at least a year until her next parole hearing. They can feel safe. Kaylee was sentenced to life in prison, also with the possibility of parole. In the state of Oklahoma, life with parole is 45 years. This means that Kaylee Fryer will be 61 years old when she can apply for her parole. Jay Childs will first be eligible for parole in 2077. If he is still alive, he will be almost 90. The prosecution said that Kaylee had masterminded everything, but Jay made his own decisions that day. He was a murderer no matter what he said. He stood over an innocent man with a knife and brutally stabbed him to death, the attorney said. One of the investigators said he was still staggered that a 15-year-old could convince a 21-year-old man to commit murder for her and make him think it was the best solution to their problem. Some family members and friends wanted Kaylee to serve an entire life sentence, with one friend saying it was a good thing that two dangerous people were now off the street. There was a sense of relief because they are afraid of her. That may sound strange to be afraid of a 16-year-old girl, but they know what she's capable of, they said. But others said it was too harsh of a sentence, and Jay should have got more time over Kaylee. Kaylee's mom, Trisha, still believes that she is innocent. Lewis's brother, Roy, said, put simply, there were no winners here. But he was thankful to the jury and prosecutors for their work in the case. When she turned 18, Kaylee appealed several times, but all of them were denied. She continues to stay on the radar, however, and in 2018, she, along with 4 others, were charged in connection with a contraband conspiracy ring. Keith lives in constant conflict, saying that things affected him so much he had to go into therapy and started drinking a lot to cope. He says he has to think about her young age of 15 at the time, and whether or not she really knew the gravity of the situation, or even believed it was actually going to happen. But if it was her plan, she could have stopped it as quickly as she had started it, and how you could lie awake through something like that, pretending it wasn't happening. It is something that people believe shows a level of detachment and coldness that is very disturbing. Keith said, I'll always miss my dad, but even now I don't know how I feel about my sister. When she calls from prison, I do speak to her, because I know that's what Dad would want. I haven't visited her, but despite what she did, I still have a sense of love for her, because I know Dad would never have given up on her, no matter what. I'd like to think I could maybe forgive her, because I genuinely don't think she understood the full consequences of her actions and the hurt it would cause. Keith said, I love my dad and I always will. I'll take his morals and convictions with me. My dad was only 5'2", but he was the only 5'2" person I'd ever look up to. My dad was, and still is, the perfect role model to me. Story April 4th, 2013, Ancaster, Ontario, Canada. 32-year-old Tim Bosma was online looking over the advert he had put out for his truck. Tim was a contractor, a hard-working family man who doted on his wife and daughter and was a big part of his local church. He and his wife Charlene had a 2-year-old daughter, and a second child was definitely on their minds. In fact, they wanted 4 children and wanted to adopt as well. They were already talking to fertility clinics. But cash was always on their minds, things were tight, things were paycheck to paycheck, and they were now even thinking about downsizing. They bought the land before they were engaged and built their home themselves, so it would be sad to leave it. But they knew wherever they went they would be happy with their growing family. Tim first of all wanted to sell up his truck, get something a bit cheaper and easier to maintain. But the listing had been up for a few weeks already and had little interest. Finally, he got a call from 2 men new to the area that were quite keen to take a look. Perfect, he thought. He would hopefully finally be getting rid of it. Tim arranged a test drive over the phone with them, and they said they would be there on May 6th. When they come, should I go with them? Tim asked Charlene. Yes, you should, because we want the truck to come back, she replied. At 9 p.m., Tim was pacing around the house anxiously. Who comes this late to see a truck? He asked Charlene. He knew, but at least someone was interested. Tim finally answered the door to the prospective buyers as Charlene was outside with their neighbor. Tim told Charlene he would be right back in Charlene, and their neighbor watched as the 3 of them got into the truck. Both she and her neighbor were feeling uncomfortable about the interaction. Something felt really off about the men and the way they were acting. Putting her nerves to the back of her mind, Charlene watched the truck speed away as she went back inside. It had now been far longer than she was expecting, and Charlene was getting nervous. Why would they be taking so long and at this time? Had they broken down? Surely Tim would have called her. His phone was definitely charged before he left. She called him, but he wasn't answering. She felt sick as she picked up the phone and shakily called 911. Police pulled up to their rural property, and Charlene gave them some descriptions. Both men were Caucasian and in their mid to late 20s. One was roughly 6 feet tall and slim. He had short brown hair and was wearing blue jeans and a long-sleeved orange shirt. The second was quite a bit shorter with a much smaller and skinnier build. He had dark hair and a red hooded sweatshirt pulled over his head. She said they thought it was odd that they had arrived on foot. Their house was very set back and not near a main road, so walking all that way was a bit weird. The taller of the two men seemed polite and chatty, but the other man was not. He was staring around, didn't talk to anyone, and was appearing shifty. Investigators started looking for Tim's truck, a black 2007 Dodge Ram pickup. 24 hours came, and they had soon pursued more than 300 leads and set up a hotline solely for Tim's case. This is not like real life. This only happens on TV and in movies. People have shared the missing persons poster all over Ontario, and they continue to do so. We have had so many volunteers helping us, and I cannot thank them all personally, but it means so much to me and to our families that these people, some of whom we do not even know, they take time from their lives to help us find Tim. Tim's world revolves around our daughter, and I know that she is number one in his mind right now, and I beg and I plead to whomever has my husband to please let him go. Please drop him somewhere. We're making an anonymous call to the police, so we know where to find him. It was just a truck. It is just a truck. You don't need him, but I do, and our daughter needs her daddy back. Some CCTV did show Tim's truck being followed by another smaller vehicle heading away from his house. This was at 10:22 p.m. They couldn't read the number plate though, and the footage was weak. Mary Bosma struggled to hold back tears as she gave a statement about her missing son. She said her Mother's Day wish was to have him home again. Finally, they got a tip from someone that thought they had met the two random men under very similar circumstances. Tim had been contacted using a burner phone with the name attached to it being Lucas Bate. Looking at their conversations, they had learned of another man called Igor. Igor had also been contacted about his truck with someone using the exact same phone. The two men asked if they could test drive it before buying it. Igor agreed and sat in the passenger seat as one of the men drove. He noticed the distinctive tattoo on the man's wrist. It said ambition. Igor stood at 6 foot, one weighing 170 pounds, and during the drive he spoke about his time in the army. The man in the back seat had asked him what he had done in the army, and Igor replied, "You don't want to know." The chatting abruptly stopped, and the two men drove his truck back, never to return or contact him about it again. Thanks to his more detailed description, when it came to the tattoos, the police ran this information through their systems, checking the booking photos of people in the area with criminal records. A man popped up who had previous charges of possession of drugs and driving while disqualified. Dylan Millard. 27-year-old Dylan was now the CEO of his family's aviation business, Millard Air Limited, founded in 1963 by his grandfather Carl, and then operated by Dylan's dad Wayne, until his death in November 2012. The business was originally an airline, but expanded into becoming an airline services company. Despite filing for bankruptcy in the 1990s, the company pulled it back, and the Mills had a prestigious history in Ontario's aviation industry and were undoubtedly a very powerful family. At 14 years old, Dylan showed great promise and talent and seemed to be following in his father's and grandfather's footsteps. He became the youngest Canadian to pilot both a helicopter and an airplane solo on the same day. He was an only child, and by all accounts his parents doted on him. As well as the business, his family had various properties and investments all across Toronto. Dylan was enrolled in private schools, took up expensive hobbies and classes, and enjoyed lavish holidays. He wanted for nothing. As he got older, he became a thrill seeker. He loved skydiving, off-road racing, and buying cars and trucks just to crush and smash them up. Dylan had worked a few jobs over the years. He had trained as a chef, studied animation, took courses in photography, but nothing really stuck, and knowing he could just quit and not have to worry about the finances, staying in a job he didn't like wasn't something he was ever going to do. It was much the same with college, which he dropped out of pretty quickly. Always seeking that adrenaline rush, he started stealing, which soon became a much bigger operation. He would plan heists with his friends, using his contacts and money to get into and out of various nefarious situations. Sprees of theft, arson and drug trafficking, you name it, Delon's group was doing it. Delon would spend his parents' money at a rapid rate on huge parties, hard drugs, and everything from modified cars and jet skis to guns and rocket launchers. He was someone that just wanted more and more of everything. Nothing ever quite scratched the itch for him. He didn't need to steal anything. Money was never an issue. He was just doing everything for the thrill of it. Friends said it was like he had developed a god complex. I think everything was a game to him. He was just so privileged, an old acquaintance said. After his dad's death at the end of 2012, Dylan was now in charge of most of the family's assets, Millard Air and Millard Properties Limited. The aircraft hangars were not used for the aircraft business anymore, instead becoming a place for him to store his weapons, stolen items, and drugs. He asked one of his friends to build him an incinerator, telling people he was starting a pet cremation business. He then ordered a much bigger second one, which he could move around. It was called the Eliminator and cost over $15,000 to make and modify. Police tracked Dylan down, and when they told him they were there because of Tim's disappearance, he calmly replied, "I thought you were going to say that." They saw the tattoo Igor had mentioned, but apart from that, detectives didn't see anything obvious or immediately incriminating in his home. They put him under surveillance anyway. This was the only strong lead they had. They soon found that his phone had been bouncing off the same cell phone towers as the burner phone used to contact Tim and Igor. They followed him around the streets, watching him withdraw large amounts of cash from the bank and meeting a man that fit the description of the second person Igor and Charlene had described. This man had a long criminal past, and it proved easy to find his name. Mark Smith. He too was put under surveillance. Just a few days after Tim Bosma went missing, police officers tailed Dylan in his SUV. They used their cars to box him in and holding their guns. They arrested him on charges of theft and forcible confinement. He had $3,000 in cash on him, some black gloves which were sent off for testing, and the keys to Tim Bosma's truck. On May 12, 2013, police finally found Tim's missing truck in Kleinburg, Ontario. It was parked in a trailer owned by Dylan, which was on the property of Madeline, Dylan's mom. It has been exactly 1 week since Tim Bosma disappeared, while taking two strangers on a test drive of his truck in Ontario. Investigators think they may now have found the truck, but there's no sign of the missing man. Ghana, Hamilton police say at this point, they're concentrating their search for 32-year-old Tim Bosma in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. Yesterday, however, police were at this Kleinburg house, seizing a trailer containing a black pickup truck, but say further investigation is required before they can confirm it's Bosma's truck. The house belongs to the suspect's mother. A neighbor called police after realizing the connection and says the trailer had been there since Thursday. It's actually very disturbing. I really hope and pray that, they find Tim, alive. I really hope it works out positively. Over the weekend, police arrested 27-year-old Dylan Millard of Toronto, charging him with forcible confinement and theft. His lawyer says he's exercising his constitutional right to remain silent and plans to plead not guilty. As far as my client's concerned, he's shocked. He's very concerned. He's disconcerted. He is from a very good family with a great upbringing. Today, police are searching a Waterloo Airport hangar belonging to Millard Air, a company founded by the suspect's family. Millard will be in court here in Hamilton on Wednesday, and police are still not saying at this point whether they've identified a second suspect. Donna. All right, Christina Stevens, thank you. The vehicle had been completely gutted and painted, but forensic testing picked up huge amounts of blood, a couple of fingerprints, and gunshot residue inside. This led them to make an awful discovery. It is with heavy heart that the Hamilton Police Service today announced the death of Ancaster resident Tim Bosma. The Hamilton Police Service has continued the relentless pursuit of all information, and all leads focused on the single priority of finding Tim Bosma. Tim's remains were found in a huge incinerator on another property linked to Dylan, burnt beyond recognition. Dylan Millard was swiftly charged with first-degree murder, a charge he denied, and the trailing of his confidant Mark Smith intensified. Police began investigating various properties and plots of land owned by the Millards. Millard Air owned 3 hangars at the Waterloo International Airport, and these were all searched. Dylan's devices were seized too, and through these, they confirmed a definite link to Mark. Mark was actually a very trusted friend of Dylan's. His life couldn't have been more opposite to Dylan's growing up, but they had a lot in common and had grown very close. Mark had met Dylan in 2008, and by this point he already had a long criminal history, a frequent user of oxycodone, LSD, and cocaine. Mark started off as Dylan's drug dealer, but Dylan quickly trusted him to get involved with his various heists and crimes. Dylan would let Mark do construction work on some of his properties. and would often pay him back by letting Mark and his girlfriend Marlena stay in his homes for free. Mark was an aspiring rapper, and Dylan even promised to build him a studio. The black gloves found with Dylan had DNA belonging to not only him, but his girlfriend Christina and Tim Bosma as well. The fingerprints found on Tim's truck were also linked to Dylan. Dylan and Mark's phones showed them exchanging messages about stealing a truck and setting up several test drives with different people. After all these fell through, in April, they found Tim's advert online. The police's timeline was now this. Dylan and Mark, both already remorseless criminals that had gone undetected for years, had no intention of paying for the truck. They were going to steal it in any way they could. When they set off from Tim's house, Dylan was driving Tim's truck, with Tim sat in the front and Mark in the back. At some point, they pulled over into a field, and Tim was shot and killed. Dylan had parked up a second car there already, and this was what was picked up on CCTV. Now they knew where Dylan's airline hangar was, and they used that to find more CCTV along the route. At 20 minutes past midnight, footage showed Tim's truck, now with something attached onto the back. It looked like some sort of heavy machinery, likely Dylan's new incinerator. CCTV at the hangar showed Dylan and Mark inside, walking around, and then outside, sparks could be seen coming out of the incinerator. They burned Tim's body, cleaned out the truck, and swapped the number plates with Dylan's SUV. The next morning, Dylan sent a group text to his employees, telling them not to come into work that day. They said this was the first time this had ever happened. Dylan quickly had the truck repainted, and the glass repaired from where the bullets had shattered it. When everybody returned to work, one of the employees spotted the newly done-up truck. He recognized the model from the media coverage of Tim's disappearance and took some photos. He couldn't stop thinking about Charlene's pleas for her husband's safe return. It was really playing on his mind, so he phoned Crime Stoppers to ask if this could be the truck they were looking for. When they confirmed it was, he ran outside and threw up. He knew what this meant, but also he now knew what Dylan was really capable of, so he had to be very careful. He held back on telling Crime Stoppers where the truck was, until he was certain everyone else would be safe. He bravely confronted Dylan, but Dylan denied everything, saying it had been a legitimate purchase and a pure coincidence that it looked the same. But this conversation had clearly rattled Dylan, as on May 9th, he asked his girlfriend Christina to help him move the truck to his mother's using his trailer. They moved the incinerator too. When Mark Smitch found out that Dylan had been arrested, he called a mutual friend and asked him to start getting rid of the drugs and weapons in Dylan's home. The mutual friend phoned a second person asking him to help too, but this friend did not feel good about it, but agreed to drop things to Mark anyway. While in the car, he turned on the radio. The news was right in the middle of an ongoing case, the disappearance of Tim Bosma, and now the arrest of their prime suspect, Dylan Millard. He panicked and immediately turned the car around. Mark Smitch was also arrested and charged with the murder of Tim Bosma. He pleaded not guilty. Police in Ontario have made another breakthrough in the Tim Bosma murder case. They've arrested a second suspect, a 25-year-old man, and will charge him with first-degree murder. Police say he's one of the men who took Bosma's truck on a test drive the night he vanished. Forensics officers were at a house in Oakville today near where Smitch was arrested. They say Smitch is known to police, and that he and 27-year-old Dylan Millard were known to each other. Millard was charged with first-degree murder last week. Police now say they have wrapped up searches at a hangar and a farm belonging to Millard. They say earlier reports that the remains of a second person were found at the farm were wrong. The new arrest in the Bosma case came on the same day as hundreds gathered to remember the 32-year-old. Dylan's girlfriend, 21-year-old Christina, was also charged with accessory after the fact. With Dylan in custody, they started looking back at two more cases that they now believed were linked to him. Meanwhile, it has emerged that police have reopened the investigation into the disappearance of Millard's former girlfriend. The first was the disappearance of Dylan's ex-girlfriend, Laura. 23-year-old Laura Babcock was described as a free spirit, and with such an outgoing and confident personality, no one was surprised that her dreams were to be an actress. She was easy to get along with, and someone so glued to her phone. She would check in with you multiple times a day. Laura had actually been in a relationship with Dylan from 2008 to 2009. When they split, they would still sleep together from time to time and remained in each other's lives. Laura then started seeing a man called Sean, someone in a much different headspace to Dylan. He was dependable, calm, and a very hard worker. Dylan also had a new girlfriend, Christina, who allegedly had been less than impressed after finding out Dylan and Laura were still talking. Laura and Sean eventually broke up, but still cared for each other a lot. He checked on her all the time, bought her an iPad, and even threw her 22nd birthday, inviting Dylan and Christina along too. As the summer of 2012 came around, Laura was going through a tougher time. She had really not been settled anywhere, was moving around a lot, taking drugs, and was sometimes working as an escort to make money. One evening, a lady named Jessica even watched Laura get out of a taxi with some luggage and her tiny dog. She watched for about 15 minutes before crossing the street and asking if she was okay. Laura said she had nowhere to go, and Jessica invited her into her home, asking if she wanted to stay for a few days. Laura said she didn't want to impose, but would be grateful to charge her phone a little. She then called a friend to pick her up, and a few hours later, Jessica said a tall, scruffy-looking man knocked at the door. The description she gave did not match Dylan or Mark, but Jessica said she instantly got a bad feeling about him. He turned to Laura and said, "Get your fucking shit and get in the car." Jessica was so uncomfortable, she insisted Laura stay with her. Laura agreed, and Jessica woke up the next day to find that Laura had cleaned her whole apartment to say thank you. On June 30th, 2012, Jessica and Laura swapped numbers, hugged each other, and said goodbye. Jessica told her to swing by when she could to pick up the rest of her things, including her sunglasses, which were still on the kitchen counter. But Laura never came back, and Jessica didn't hear from her again. Flash forward a month, and no one else had seen or heard from Laura either. The police were called, but sadly it seemed the investigation never took off. They failed to take any statements from the people in her life. She had vanished without a trace. There was no activity on her bank account, and no activity on her phone. Sean was really worried, and knowing that Dylan and her had been talking a lot in the days and hours before she went missing, he really pressed Dylan on her whereabouts. Dylan said he didn't know, saying that she had just called him up looking for drugs, but he hadn't given her any, and that was where the conversation had ended. He coldly told Sean he should have no reasonable expectation of finding her. Sean had told the police everything way back when she disappeared and pointed them in the direction of Dylan, but they didn't speak to Dylan, and it seemed her case went cold almost right away. As Dylan sat in custody awaiting trial for the murder of Tim, police were now looking at his phone data from around the time Laura went missing. First, I will update you on the missing persons case of Miss Laura Babcock. Laura Babcock was reported missing by an ex-boyfriend who became concerned when he could no longer reach her. A missing persons report was generated and an investigation was commenced. During the weekend of May 10, 2013, a Mr. Dylan Millard was arrested. As a result of his arrest, the Toronto Police Service became aware of several phone records belonging to Laura Babcock. As a result of this information, a production order was prepared, and we are now conducting a comprehensive review of the entire phone records. I can confirm at this time that there appears to be phone contact on July 3rd, 2012 between Laura Babcock and Mr. Dylan Millard. Dylan sent a text to Mark Smith a couple of months before Laura went missing and said, "How ruthless are you willing to be to make money? I have some ideas, but it's next level stuff. We'll talk about it this weekend. I know you need income." He asked his friend to trace Laura and follow her every move with one text reading. "If you could keep me updated on where Laura goes to, that'd be of use to me." And the most damning text of all was to Christina, which read, "First I'm going to hurt her, then I'm going to make her leave. I will remove her from our lives." A couple of days before Laura went missing, Dylan ordered his new incinerator, the Eliminator, and bought a new gun too. It seemed that perhaps Laura had contacted Dylan for help, possibly a place to stay, and this was how she came to be within that day. On the day she vanished, Laura and Dylan got together at a train station, right near one of Dylan's homes on July 3rd at 7 p.m. And after 7 p.m., her digital footprint ceased to exist. So, what had happened to Laura Babcock? Detectives couldn't be sure of how she had died, or who had been the one to kill her, but they believed her body was rolled up in a blue plastic tarp stashed in Dylan's barn. This was confirmed by a photo of the blue tarp found on Dylan's computer, and detectives could tell from the way that it was wrapped up. It seemed as if Laura was inside it at the time. He was still testing his incinerator and setting it up so Laura remained wrapped up and hidden for weeks. The iPad Sean had given Laura was connected to Dylan's computer, and he renamed it Mark's iPad before gifting it to Mark Smith. On July 23rd, the incinerator was ready to go, and Dylan sent a text to Mark saying, "Barbecue has run its warm-up. It's ready for the meat, and made a search for what temperature his cremation done at. Laura's body was then burned, and someone took a video showing the sparks flying from the machine. Pictures of what seemed to be charred human bones inside the incinerator were also found on Dylan's computer, and a day after Laura's body was burned, Mark even made a video rapping about it and using Laura's iPad to read his lyrics. Mark Smitch would implicate himself again almost a year later when he admitted to his girlfriend Marlena that Tim's body wasn't the only body they'd burned in the incinerator. Police then found a red bag in Mark's bedroom, still all this time later, which contained Laura's belongings. Dylan Millard and Mark Smitch were both charged with murder for a second time. The second case police reopened was just 4 months after Laura vanished and 18 months before Tim was murdered. On November 29, 2012, the police had been called to the house of Wayne Millard, Dylan's dad. Dylan gave a formal statement and told investigators that he had walked into his father's bedroom at 6 p.m. and found him dead. A gun was lying near his body, and it looked like he had taken his own life. Because it was late in the afternoon, I pulled my head in. Something didn't really seem right about the way he was laying. He was laying very still. I walked into the room. I saw blood on the pillow, and for a moment I had to leave the room. I actually went back to my room, got out my phone, and walked back into my dad's room. I called my mother and told her what I was seeing. I literally said, "I'm standing in my dad's room, and there's blood all over his pillow." Instead, I stayed with her on the phone for a while. I tried to get her to take a taxi, but she insisted she drive out. So she drove over, and I texted a friend of mine, Andrew Mahalski. I told him that something terrible had happened, and asked if he would please come over. I didn't want to be alone. He did, and we waited in the driveway together until my mother got there. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and called the police. Wayne's cause of death was ruled as a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he was cremated within a week. Dylan then fired everyone at the airline business, changed all the locks, and essentially ran the company into the ground. Dylan told the police that the last time he saw his dad was around noon the day before. He said his father was struggling financially, was an alcoholic, and had depression. He said business had not been doing well, and his dad was now relying on his own savings and huge loans to fund everything. Although you can never really know the true mental state someone is in, many were left shocked and confused by the ruling. Something about it just hadn't sat right. Wayne had actually been in really positive headspace about everything. He was a savvy businessman with a new plan of action and was keen to get everything back to where it once was. He was also telling people that he was ready to cut Dylan off due to his reckless spending and lack of support with him running the business. He hoped this would get him into a new gear and motivate him to change his ways. Flash forward a year later, and experts were looking over everything again. They found the position Wayne would have had to be in to hold the gun would have been too unnatural to make logical sense. They tested shots on 20 mannequins in a bid to recreate the gunshot residue pattern as if it had been self-inflicted, but they couldn't make it match. Dylan's DNA, which was now on their system, was tested against what was found on the gun, and there was a 1 in 5 quadrillion chance that the DNA belonged to anyone else. Dylan had purchased the gun too. Phone records showed that Dylan's phone moved from Mark's house at around 1 a.m. to Wayne's house, where it stayed until shortly after 6 a.m., despite the fact he said he didn't go near the property until he found him. Project Capella is a multi-jurisdictional major case investigation looking into the homicide of Timothy Bosma, the disappearance of Laura Babcock, and the death of Wayne Millard as a result of an ongoing and intensive criminal investigation that commenced on May 6, 2013, involving the collaborative efforts of the Toronto Police Service, No. 22 Division, and the Homicide Squad and the Ontario Provincial Police. I can advise you of the following. Dylan Millard, 28 years, has now been formally charged with first-degree murder in relation to the deaths of Wayne Millard and Laura Babcock. Dylan was charged with the murder of Wayne Millard. He pleaded not guilty for a third time, and finally 2 vicious killers, in Dylan's case a serial killer, were off the streets. Sean, Laura's ex, was busy himself filing an official complaint against the Toronto Police Service about the handling of Laura's case and their apparent lack of interest in her whereabouts. He argued that if they had done their due diligence back then and taken it seriously, Tim and Wayne might still be alive. A 4-month-long trial would begin as the prosecution first sought justice for Tim Bosma. It wasn't a surprise when Dylan and Mark turned on each other and gave 2 opposing stories. Dylan said he only wanted to steal the truck, but Mark pulled a gun on Tim. Mark said it was Dylan who changed the plan and decided he wanted the contractor dead. But the prosecutor's theory was that they were both complicit and knew exactly what was going to happen to Tim. They carefully and meticulously tried to cover their own tracks, but not carefully enough. It was an incredibly emotional day at the Tim Bosma murder trial. The Crown zeroed in on the day police searched Dellen Millard's farm and what they found there. Shannon Martin is joining us live from the Hamilton courthouse. Shannon, the court saw a series of photographs. Share that with us. Yes, we did, Amory. And as you mentioned, a very emotional day, by far the most emotion we've seen in court. Keep in mind, we have heard a lot of graphic testimony. But today there was open weeping as we heard from police officers detailing the frantic search at Dellen Millard's farm. They were hoping to find Bosma. Instead, they made a grisly discovery. In all caps and bright bold red lettering, its name spray painted. The Eliminator, a heavy-duty piece of farm machinery used to cremate animals. When it turned up on May 10, 2013, on a farm property in Ayr, Ontario, this dirt biker pulled over and snapped a photograph. Asked by the Crown today why Chasmaine did so, he testified, because nobody would believe me that it was there. Probably I wouldn't believe it. His photo proved incredibly useful. The very next day, May 11th, police arrived at the farm armed with search warrants in their investigation into Dellen Millard. Sergeant Annette Hughes was part of the Hamilton police team that raced into the woods and came face to face with the Eliminator. She told the jury, looking at the sheer size of it, "I thought it was a real possibility that someone could be inside. Not just someone, but Bosma." Hughes opened the top hatch. Inside were not one, but two bones. Right now, all the defense really has to do is try to poke holes in the Crown's theory. What they've been zeroing in on is how the police handled the evidence, and whether any evidence was potentially contaminated. This is a 4-month trial though, Amory, so it will be some time before we actually hear from the defense side. Throughout the trial, Delon's mom, Madeline, said she truly believed her son was being framed, calling him a gentle boy. The jury deliberated for 5 long days before finding both men guilty of first-degree murder. They were given life in prison with parole eligibility after 25 years. Christina, Delon's girlfriend, also admitted to obstructing justice and helping Delon destroy evidence, but avoided jail time in exchange for pleading guilty. Today has been a very long-awaited day for our families. For over 3 years, we have waited for justice for Tim. For 3 years, we have been in and out of this courthouse, forced to look at and breathe the same air, in the same space, with the utter depths of depravity in our society. We have had to endure being near the 2 men that walked down my driveway on May 6, 2013, and took away the bright life in our lives. That was Tim. It is their own unspeakable evil acts that have taken away their freedom. What is unfair is that now that this chapter is over, we have to truly begin building our lives. What is unfair is that regardless of all that has transpired in the courtroom today, one thing will never change for us. There is one absolute constant for us. This does not bring Tim back, and he will still never come home. For Tim's murderers, their life sentence begins now. Ours began over 3 years ago. The men then went on trial for the murder of Laura Babcock. The ever-arrogant Dellen acted as his own lawyer this time, claiming that there was no evidence to suggest that Laura was dead. On the stand, he interviewed Sean and Laura's father, and was frequently pulled up for being inappropriate and personal, going too far with his questions. A big part of this trial were some letters they had seized. Delon and Christina would write to each other while he was in prison. In one letter he wrote, "It's a very real possibility that you will be called as a witness at my trial. Whatever you may believe, it needs to be put aside. This is what happened." He then tried to coach her, sending her a long, detailed story that she was to follow exactly. He said that Laura was doing cocaine with Mark, and Christina and Delon had both seen her alive and well. They left Laura and Mark alone together, and the next day she was missing. Mark told Dellen that she had overdosed from mixing cocaine with prescription pills, but he hadn't wanted to call the police. Dellen's letter finished by saying, "Read this a couple of times, then destroy it immediately," something he would write at the end of just about every one of his letters. When Christina was arrested, they found the notes she had written and left in her bedroom. One of them called Dellen my sweet serial killer. Another said, "Limbs cut off without hesitation." Again, both Dellen and Mark were found guilty of first-degree murder of Laura Babcock. They were given the same sentence, life in prison with parole eligibility, after 25 years. Laura's dad said that the trial had felt like a 6-week-long funeral, adding, "Like any parent that loses a child, we can only move forward with the thoughts of what might have been." Without our Laura, our days will never be as joyful as they once were. After almost 6 years, the pain is as great as ever. But we want everyone to know that we will be strong and will move forward in a way that we know Laura would have approved of, and that is to try to be happy. In addition to being murderers, this pair of cowards, we could have accepted an earlier parole eligibility. But when asked in court if they had any final words, both declined to say even that they were sorry for our loss or had any remorse for what they were proven to have done. Regardless, any words they might have said would not have lessened our anguish, nor that of the Bosma family. We can be assured that these horrible specimens of humanity will not come outside of a prison for decades to come. In September 2018 news, a judge found Delon Millard guilty of first-degree murder in the death of his father, Wayne Millard. Delon was convicted of murder for a third time. He smirked and stared at the ceiling as the verdict was read out. He was given an additional 25 years, taking him to 75 years before he could apply for parole. It was the longest sentence ever handed down without parole eligibility in Ontario. It would mean if alive, he would be 102 years old. But after a change in the law, Delon and Mark's respective 75 and 50-year ineligibility for parole periods were deemed unconstitutional, and this was reduced to no more than 25 years. They will now be eligible for parole in 2043, but whether or not they are successful is another story. Matthew Ward Jackson, another acquaintance of Delon, was sentenced to 11 years after pleading guilty to 9 charges relating to gun possession and trafficking. Among the charges were the sale of a gun to Delon that he had used to kill his dad, and the sale of a second gun that was used to shoot Tim. The 2 convicted killers and high-profile murderers of Tim Bosma and Laura Babcock are seeking appeals from Ontario's highest court. Delon Millard and Mark Smith are both serving life sentences. While a recent change by the Supreme Court means the pair qualify for shorter sentences, experts tell us it's highly unlikely that would ever happen. Delon and Mark both appealed their convictions, but these were rejected in 2023. Delon also appealed his conviction when it came to his father's murder as well, but again, this was rejected. These killers were and are greedy, arrogant, and entitled. They would stop at nothing to get what they wanted whenever they wanted it, and if that meant taking people's lives, then they would with no feeling or remorse. One has to wonder what would have been next if they weren't caught when they were. Laura was working hard to get her life back on track. She was finally around good people that really loved her, people like Sean. But sadly, she couldn't shake the reliance she had on Delon, someone she thought was helping her and also cared about her. Wayne was really optimistic for his business's future and was ready to set his son on his own path, which would hopefully make their relationship less strained and much stronger. And Tim simply just wanted to sell his truck. He just wanted a bit of extra cash and to plan a second baby with his wife. The only words that come to mind with a case like this are cold, callous, selfish, and totally senseless. Story 5, Independence, Missouri, in the United States of America, home to Louise Dickey. 63-year-old Louise Dickey had previously worked in accounting in Kansas City. After being involved in a serious car accident, Louise had suffered massive injuries that had left her unable to walk far or able to lift more than 5 pounds in each hand. Her injuries had left her needing to take pain medication, but in spite of this, she was always cheerful and happy, and so grateful for the help and support she had. Her daughter Miranda was close by and on hand to help, and her neighbor Barbara would also help out where she could. Miranda would visit her weekly to help out, and also check on Chloe, Monkey, and Reba, Louise's cat. One of Louise's biggest loves was music. She loved music so much, in fact, she named one of her cats Reba after her favorite star, Reba McEntire. She lived alone and mostly kept to herself. Her family was also small. Her mother lived in Lee's Summit with Miranda's brother. There was also an uncle who lived in Detroit, but there were few other family members apart from them. She loved nothing more than spending time listening to records with her best friend Kevin. Kevin said she was gentle and kind, a real character. March 29, 2016, Miranda was contacted by Louise's neighbor Barbara. She wanted to know if Louise had gone out of town and forgotten to tell her, as her car was no longer parked in the driveway. No, she hadn't. This was extremely unusual, and there was no reason at all for her car to be gone. Straight away, Miranda called her mother. The call went straight to voicemail. No answer. Wasting no time, Miranda jumped in her car and drove over to Louise's house at the 10400 block of East 27th Street. She parked at Barbara's and Barbara stood waiting outside for her. Miranda let herself into her mom's home and called out, but it was quiet. Looking to her right, she noticed her mother's purse on the sofa with the Ziploc bags that she usually kept in her purse, which were empty. As she headed down the hall trying to find Louise, her daughter spotted the bathroom door. It was shut. The bathroom door was never shut. Miranda even said she had never ever known that bathroom door to be closed. As she slowly went into the bathroom, she came across a nightmarish scene. Her mother's body lay in the bathtub. She had been stabbed to death, suffering a shocking 98 stab wounds. Her throat had also been cut. Miranda immediately called 911. The emergency services were soon at the scene with Detective Bryce Minter heading the murder investigation. There was blood absolutely everywhere in the bathroom, and the violence of this murder was plain to see. The officers asked Miranda about Louise's empty purse, and Miranda explained that not only was that extremely weird, but she couldn't find her mother's cell phone. The police put in a request for information on the missing bank cards and a ping on the cell phone. A bolo or be on the lookout was also issued for the missing vehicle at Golden 1998 Buick Park Avenue. Miranda was taken to the station to be interviewed. The crime was shocking for those in the community, with neighbors calling the area safe and quiet. Seeing so many police and forensics officers and journalists was extremely rare. It's a quaint and charming little mom-and-pop neighborhood. There are a lot of retired people that live around here, and a few young families, said one resident. 41 Action News spoke to at least a dozen neighbors from Louise's street, but none of them really knew anything about her. She never came outside for nothing, said one neighbor, who lived just a few doors down from Louise. Some neighbors said they didn't even know anyone lived at the house. We thought the home was abandoned because you don't see anybody in there, said one neighbor, who could see Louise's house from her backyard. A couple of miles away from the murder scene, Officer Jason Harris was on patrol, and after hearing about the bolo, he set off to search for the vehicle. And less than an hour later, he found it. It was parked in a convenience store parking lot on Truman Road. The owner of the store told them it had been there since the night before. Detective Minder soon arrived and noticed something that could hold the key. Pointing in the direction of the car was a security camera. They went into the store and requested to view the footage. They stood waiting for the car to come into frame, and finally it did. The car was driven to the parking spot, and out got a young male who walked towards the convenience store. They needed to be sure that whoever was driving the car was alone. They pulled footage from a different camera, which showed an empty passenger seat. They then switched to the camera from inside the shop and waited for the man to walk in. Given how violent the murder was, they were expecting him to have traces of blood on his hands and clothes, but there was no blood to be seen. He could be seen shaking hands with someone in the store, someone he clearly knew, before getting out a phone and attempting to call somebody. As he moved into the store and headed towards the back, footage from another camera showed him walking up to the ATM. He took out a card and tried to withdraw money, but it didn't work. He then left the store and got back into Louise's car, but he didn't drive off. 19 seconds later, he got out of the car and walked back into the store. He spoke to an employee before leaving once more. Luckily, that member of staff was in and working that day. Officers showed him the clip, hoping he would be able to ID the man in question, but the employee couldn't. He couldn't even remember talking to him. It was extremely disappointing for the police. At 18.26, the man was seen exiting the vehicle and waving towards an approaching dark forward Focus. The car stopped and he got in on the passenger side before it drove off. Frustratingly, the footage was not very clear and a license plate could not be made out. They looked at another camera from the parking lot to try and get a clearer image of the driver. The driver was shorter, leading them to believe it was possibly a woman driving. They examined the car more closely. There was a missing hubcap on the driver's side, and as the car pulled onto the road, the hubcap was also missing from the passenger's side. They needed to find the car, and they needed to find the driver, so another bolo was issued. That's right, Chris, as you said. That homicide victim identified by Independence Police as 63-year-old Louise M. Dickey. Now this morning, police were here at this convenience store at Truman and River collecting what could be a key piece of evidence in the case, surveillance video. Now earlier today, police were back on the scene of that homicide at 27th and Hardy Road. The victim was discovered there Tuesday afternoon when her daughter came to the house to check on her after getting a call from a neighbor that the victim's car was missing. And that's what brings us back to this convenience store. Tonight, a clerk here told me police were at the store around 10:30 this morning, getting surveillance video from the store's owner. Now, Independence police have not said whether the car found here is related to the homicide of Louise Dickey, but officers also tell me that detectives are still actively investigating this case, and tonight the search for a suspect continues. As the officers headed back to the station, a vital piece of the puzzle was coming in, the bank records for Louise Dickey. It showed that the day before at 17:11, her card had been used at a Walgreens store. This was 23 minutes before her last call with Miranda. Knowing that this shopping trip and the transaction would have been caught on camera, the officers wasted no time in heading over. The footage began to play, and at 7 minutes past 5, the car pulled into the parking lot. Two people got out and headed inside. Footage from inside the Walgreens showed that it was Louise, with the mystery man who had left her car in the convenience store. They purchased several items before leaving. This was not long before the police believed she had been murdered. Who is this man, and how did he know Louise? Miranda was shown the footage at the station, with the officers being hopeful she would be able to shed light on who he was, but she couldn't identify him. So the officers went back to the bank records. Where had her car been used after Walgreens? At 2:02 a.m. on the day her body was discovered in the bathroom, her card had been used again at a quick trip in Kansas City, Missouri. Someone had tried to take out $300, which had failed. 1 minute later, there was an attempt to withdraw $100. Luckily for the officers, this quick trip also had surveillance cameras. From the footage taken at 2:02 a.m., the blonde man from the convenience store in Walgreens could be seen standing at the ATM, trying to get money out of Louise's bank account. They looked at footage from other cameras in the store, hoping there would be a clearer image of his face. And sure enough, there was. This was the man they believed had brutally murdered Louise Dickey in her own home. They needed to find him, and find him quickly. As he left the store, he got into a car parked outside that had its headlights on, suggesting someone was sat in the vehicle waiting for him. It was a dark Ford Focus, with the driver's side hubcap missing, the same vehicle that had picked him up from the convenience store. They decided to talk to other people in Louise's life to see if any of them knew who this man was. They showed the footage to her neighbor Barbara. She not only knew him, she was related to him. He was her nephew, Corey King, 26 years old and from Kansas City. Barbara was quickly taken into a room to be formally interviewed. Corey's your nephew? Yes. How did he become acquainted with you? Through me. How did you get to see him all the time? He was shooting up something at one time. Okay. I don't know. 15 hours after requesting the ping, Louise's cell phone responded. It was showing at the Ameristar Casino, 10 miles outside of Independence. Officers raced over there, hoping to find Corey. But when they arrived, there was no sign of him, and there was no sign of the Ford Focus. They spoke to the casino and asked to review the surveillance footage from the last few hours. At 3:20, Corey was picked up. He was talking to someone, but that person was just out of frame. But not for long. As Corey walked over to the ATM, a woman followed. The police theorized that this was the person who had been driving him around in the Ford Focus. Corey tried Louise's card again, but he got nowhere. At 4:08 a.m., Corey was seen walking out of the casino with the woman, and the Ford Focus was seen driving away, signaling to turn right out of the casino premises. But as the car got to the end of the road, it stopped. Then after a pause, it turned left instead. Worried that Corey may try to flee the state, and knowing that he was clearly dangerous and capable of extreme violence, a crime bulletin was issued to all police agencies in the area. Phone records from Louise's phone showed that when Corey had been on the phone in the convenience store, he had used her phone to place the call, and all of these calls had been to the same number. Finally, the police would get the break they were hoping for. Another ping had come through from the phone, and officers had the car in question under surveillance. It was parked at a motel. Wasting no time, officers raced over, and Corey and the woman were taken into custody. When Corey was taken in for questioning, he denied having anything to do with the murder of Louise Dickey, but his lies would soon catch up with him. 24 hours after Louise Dickey's body was discovered, Corey finally told the truth. He said that during the time he had been under the influence of drugs, and an argument had broken out. Louise wouldn't let him sleep on her sofa. He said he told her he couldn't leave due to the effects of the drugs in his system, but she wouldn't let him stay. He told the investigators that he had grabbed a box cutter from in the house, gone up behind Louise, grabbed her, and slit her throat. When she grabbed her neck, he cut her again. He then dragged her body to the bathroom and put her into the tub before continuing to stab her with another knife. Why? because he said he felt like she didn't trust him. He stole $10, her phone, her debit card, prescription medication from her purse, and the key to her 1998 Buick Park Avenue. Okay, 26-year-old Corey King was charged with armed criminal action and first-degree murder. Prosecutors requested a $500,000 cash bond. There was no evidence to suggest that the woman from the Ford Focus had anything to do with what had happened to Louise, and as such, she was released without charge. Right now, a 26-year-old man is facing a murder charge in Independence after police say he killed a woman using a box cutter. 41 Action News reporter Tom Dempsey was live from the home where Louise Dickey was killed. And Tom, what do friends and family think happened at this point? Well guys, police are saying that Corey King was at Louise Dickey's house here on Monday evening. I'll step out of the way so our viewers can get a better look. This is on East 27th Street, right near Hardy Avenue in Independence. After going to a gas station and a Dollar General together, police say King murdered Dickey in the bathroom of this home. Here's a look at King's mugshot. According to police, King has a history of substance abuse. He claims he was high on marijuana and Xanax during the murder. Police say King's aunt was good friends with Dickey. He told police he wanted to sleep on Dickey's couch on Monday night, and when she refused, he stabbed her multiple times using a box cutter and a knife. Friends and family describe Dickey as being caring and always happy. As you can imagine, they are shocked at this crime. She never hurt anybody. She was open and generous. She will be dearly missed by everyone who knew her. I don't think I could ever forgive him. I'm a Christian, but I could not forgive him for what he did. Now police say King stole Dickey's car. They later found that car at a nearby gas station. King tried to use Dickey's ATM card as well as her cell phone. Using that, police were able to track him down and arrest him at a motel in the metro area. For Louise's loved ones, Corey's actions were nothing short of devastating. As you can imagine, the family is very much shocked following all this. The crime is really tough to believe, and it happened in this house you see behind me here in Independence, when a man stabbed Louise Dickey multiple times inside of her bathroom. For family members of Louise Dickey, it's hard to believe. My mom mostly kept to herself. She was on disability and lived alone. Dickey was murdered inside her home on Monday. It was awful. It was awful. I don't think anybody deserves to die that way, and it was so evil. Longtime high school friend Sabra Armstrong said she spoke with Dickey the day before she was murdered. She hopes justice is served. Very angry, and I know they've caught the guy, and I hope he gets the death penalty. Meanwhile, family members remember Dickey as someone who deserved better. She was so generous, so helpful. If I needed something, she said, well, let's go get it. She loved cats. She had 3 of them. She'd call herself a cat lady all the time. Corey King would later enter a plea of guilty to armed criminal action and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Louise Dickey, and also received a life sentence for armed criminal action, which would run concurrently. Corey King remains in prison at the Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri. Louise Dickey was a kind, caring woman, someone who was devoted to her family and so grateful for those who helped and supported her. Knowing how she must have suffered in the last moments of her life is deeply upsetting and incredibly tragic. As Miranda said, her mother was open and generous, the kind of person who would never hurt anybody.